Chapter 580. These days, other than returning to the palace at night, Rinpochian spent the rest of his time in that courtyard. In a daze. He was in a daze because all he did from beginning to end was instructing others on how to make the distilling boiler, which wasn't considered complicated. Other than that, he spent most of his time in a daze. After being busy for a few months in Tianjing Basin, he enjoyed being able to be in a daze with nothing to do. Due to his special status, Rinpochian rarely interacted with other officials. As a result, he didn't know that there was more than one discussion about him outside the courtyard these days. The main reason was about the rearguard commandery in Tianjing Basin and the current Zhang family. Although the rearguard commandery was still outside the establishment, with the approval of the Empress, it would soon become an official department of Dayo. This time, regardless of whether the Zhang family won or lost, they would probably serve Dayo in the future. If the Zhang family won against Rinpochian, they would probably take this opportunity to get an official position. Rinpochian was used to multi-ethnic countries on Earth and was used to letting the capable ones handle everything. This seemed normal to Rinpochian, but it wasn't a small matter in the hearts of many people. This was because in the past few decades, there had never been a precedent of someone from another race entering the imperial court as an official. It could be said that he had a special status. After experiencing the initial onlookers, everyone began to accept Rinpochian as the Empress's future husband with each and every one of his actions. However, now that there was the addition of the rearguard commandery made up entirely of remnant citizens of the Han nation and the Zhang family, many people in the imperial court had objections. However, the Empress had already approved of these two matters. With her temperament, no one could stop these two matters. The discussions couldn't be suppressed, but they didn't reach Rinpochian's ears. Even the Water Empress had heard about it. However, she merely chuckled and put the matter aside, ignoring it. There were many things that she had seen more than others. Judging from the final outcome of Tianjing Basin, she had a little more confidence in Rinpochian's approach. All that was left was to wait for time to test and see if everything would develop as Rinpochian had expected. 5 days passed just like that. 5 days later, when the east gate opened, a neatly dressed Zhang Jun stood in front of it. He looked up and saw that the west gate was already open. Rinpochian was sitting in a rocking chair in front of it, dozing off. "Thank you for waiting, Sir Ren." Zhang Junjun laughed. He was also wondering if Rinpochian had done everything or if he had given up after failing. Based on his experience, the latter was more likely. However, he was still worried and even more nervous than before. After all, this matter concerned the future of half of the Zhang clan. It could be said to be of great importance, and even he couldn't avoid it. Although he was dressed neatly and appeared to be in high spirits, his bloodshot eyes still spoke volumes. "You guys are done too?" Rinpochian raised his head and looked at Zhang Junjun and his nephews, as well as the tightly wrapped carriages behind the gate. "I'll get someone to inform Her Majesty to be a witness," Rinpochian said with a smile. He turned around and shouted. Very soon, a guard left. "Thank you, Sir Ren." Zhang Junjun cupped his hands, sat down, and closed his eyes to rest. After 2 hours, everyone heard the sound of horses coming from outside the courtyard. Many people had arrived. Rinpochian finally perked up and went out to welcome the Empress. After exiting the door, Rinpochian saw a majestic procession. Other than the guards and the Empress's imperial chariot, there were also many ministers behind them. For example, Shi Qing, Tang Jinya, Tu Wan, and the others were among them. All of them wore sunglasses and looked like blind bears walking upright. The aboriginal men were majestic, and the women were enchanting. Tu Wan and a few other female officials with graceful figures were also very eye-catching. "Greetings, Your Majesty." Rinpochian greeted the Empress first. Then he smiled and swept his gaze across the officials. He discovered that Li Qinxiu, Shi Yuya, and Hong Wu were among them. It seemed like they had returned to attend the Empress's birthday celebration. Li Qinxiu and Shi Wanya gently nodded at Rinpochian as a greeting. On the other hand, Hong Wu was furious. When Rinpochian and the Empress left, he purposely kissed him at the city gate. He had been suppressing his resentment for half a year, and now he could finally see Rinpochian. If looks could kill, Rinpochian would have been hacked into pieces by him. It just so happens that the court session is taking place, so I asked everyone to follow me to take a look, the Empress said. Rinpochian didn't think much of it as he had seen many of these people. Zhang Junzheng, on the other hand, was excited. The bigger the scene, the better. Furthermore, the fact that the Empress had brought so many high-ranking officials made him feel that the Empress was taking this matter very seriously. Please get ready and begin, the Empress said faintly as she walked forward in her red dress. Everyone stood in the courtyard. Rinpochian smiled and asked, "What's the first competition?" "Let's compete in dyeing," Zhang Junzheng said. He knew that they would probably lose the competition in brewing wine. If they lost in the first round, they would be looked down upon. It would be better to compete in dyeing. That's settled then. Rinpochian smiled and ordered someone to bring out the dyed cloth from the courtyard. The Zhang family's cloth was taken out first. There were a total of 7 rolls of pure color silk: red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple. Because they didn't make it in time, the colors were a little light, and people would feel that the colors weren't right at first glance. Zhang Junzheng hurriedly explained, "This cloth takes a long time to dye. There are only 5 days this time, which is definitely not enough time. As a result, the dyeing is somewhat inadequate. As a result, this commoner and Sir Run are competing in the durability of the colors." "Oh, this is the first time I've heard of it. What about you?" The Empress said faintly, looked at Rinpochian, and asked, "They'll be here soon." Rinpochian chuckled as he listened to the footsteps in the courtyard. Then he saw 3 guards coming out with rolls of cloth that looked a lot smaller. Each of the guards was carrying a roll of cloth of 7 different colors: red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple. However, the color of the cloth that each guard was carrying was different. They actually dyed 3 different colors of each color. Furthermore, the colors were bright and beautiful. Compared to the cloth sold on the street, the colors were richer. As long as one wasn't blind, one would be able to see the difference at a glance. The eyes of Tu Wan and the other female officials lit up when they saw these rolls of cloth. The other officials didn't have much interest in this competition, but after seeing Zhang Junzheng's 7 rolls of silk and Rinpochian's 21 rolls of cotton cloth, they chuckled. It would have been fine if Zhang Junzheng hadn't said those words. However, after hearing what he said and comparing the dyed cloth of both parties, Zhang Junzheng's words made everyone want to laugh. "Didn't you say that 5 days wasn't enough?" Not only did Principal Run dye the cloth better than the one sold on the market, but he also dyed it in 3 different colors. What else could you say? As for Zhang Junzheng, he was stunned when he saw the cloth that Rinpochian asked his men to carry out. How did the other party do it in 5 days? Furthermore, why were the colors so bright? How many times did they dye it in 5 days to achieve this? What kind of dye did they use? Soon after, he discovered the problem. The cloth that the other party used seemed to have never been seen before. "Sir Run, can I touch this cloth?" Zhang Junzheng cupped his hands. Of course. Zhang Junzheng took a few steps forward and rubbed the cloth with his fingers. Indeed, it was a cloth that he had never seen before. It seemed like the problem was with this cloth. Could it be that this cloth was easy to dye? "Thank you very much, Sir Ren. If we were to compare the color of the cloth, I would have already lost this round. However, this time we are comparing the durability of the color after washing," Zhang Junjing said. Although the Zhang family had lost in terms of color, he somewhat regretted not requesting for both parties to use the same cloth. However, the most important factor was the degree of fading after washing. This was the content of the competition. Of course, when 2 pieces of cloth of the same size were placed in hot water, one of the pots immediately turned red. However, the other pot of water only had a slight change. Zhang Junjing's face turned extremely ugly. That pot of water that turned red was the Zhang family's cloth. Without needing to compare the 2 pieces of cloth, he knew that the Zhang family had lost the first round of the competition. The Zhang family, who had always had the best cloth, actually lost to the person in front of him, whether it was in terms of color or durability. This was a bigger blow to him than losing the first round. One had to know that the Zhang family had already lost 2 rounds, including the wine brewing. This meant that the Zhang family was inferior to the other party in these 2 categories. Furthermore, these 2 categories were chosen by the Zhang family without the other party's knowledge beforehand. The chances of the other party cheating could be said to be very small. Even the entire Dayo couldn't beat the Zhang family in these 2 categories, let alone in such a short period of time. Chapter 581. Someone bring out the wine, Rinpoche shouted at the guards behind him. The result of the cloth dyeing competition could be seen by the naked eye. Naturally, it was the second round. The Empress's spirits were lifted after hearing Rinpoche's words. Ever since that day, she had been thinking about this wine. Unfortunately, there was only a little wine left, so she had to control herself from thinking about it. Otherwise, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to let go and would drink it all. At that time, Rinpoche would definitely lose. Soon after, a guard brought out 3 glass bottles that contained 500 grams of wine. Through the bottles, one could see the amber wine swaying. The Empress glanced at Rinpoche. There didn't seem to be any wine left from that day. In fact, there was only 5 kilograms of wine in that jar. After the Empress drank it, there was only slightly more than 500 grams left. Fortunately, there was still some wine left in the distiller, which produced another 2 kilograms. Sir Run, can I have a taste? Zhang Junzheng looked at the wine bottles that Rinpoche had brought over. He had already given up on this round. Now, he just wanted to know how Rinpoche's wine tasted like and how much stronger it was compared to the Zhang family's wine. Rinpoche asked someone to pour a bowl of wine for Zhang Junzheng. The amber wine emitted an extremely strong aroma when it was poured out of the bottle. Even the people behind the Empress could smell it, and the sound of saliva being swallowed could be heard. Tang Jingye and Qin Chuan were stunned. After Zhang Junzheng took it, he first closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then he took a small sip. The mellow and pleasant fragrance entered his mouth, and the sweet fragrance ignited his taste buds along the tip of his tongue. Then he felt as if his throat and stomach were on fire. After a long time, the flame subsided, and traces of cool air soothed the burned part of his throat, immediately making him feel comfortable. I concede defeat. We have lost the second round. Zhang Junzheng closed his eyes to savor the aftertaste for a long time before opening them again. There was no need to compete with just this wine alone. Although he was very surprised that they had lost 2 rounds in a row, he was most concerned about the third round. He was confident that they would definitely win the third round. The torsion springs used in the Yun Nation's ballistae were made by the Zhang family. He believed that even if someone obtained the Zhang family springs, they wouldn't be able to make them. There were several unknown materials added to the steel used to make the spring. Even if others knew what these materials were, it would take a long time to figure out the ratio. Not to mention, the method of quenching was also a secret. He-Ju, take it out. Following Zhang Junzheng's words, Zhang Hachi brought out a tray from the courtyard with 2 torsion springs of the same size, each the size of a fist. In addition, there was a shelf made of wood and metal. Your Majesty, the Empress of Dayo, Sir Run, and everyone else, this is the most important product of the Zhang family, the spring. The repeating crossbows made from springs were 100 times better than the crossbow battalion of Great Xia. This spring is the core. If the spring doesn't meet the requirements, the power of this repeating crossbow will be greatly reduced. Zhang Junzheng wasn't affected by the previous 2 failures and introduced confidently. He believed that this item would definitely move the Empress. Sir Run, have you made these springs? Zhang Junzheng cupped his fists and smiled. I have made them, Rinpoche replied. However, the size was somewhat different from Zhang Junzheng's. The shelf that Zhang Junzheng took out was obviously a simple crossbow that was used to test the tension and elasticity of the torsion spring. However, the size of Rinpoche's spring didn't match. This was something that he had overlooked previously. It doesn't matter. The size of his crossbow can be adjusted. No matter what the size of your spring is, the Zhang family has a way. Zhang Junzheng immediately laughed after hearing Rinpoche's explanation. That's good. Rinpoche clapped his hands, and a guard immediately came out with a bag. He poured the contents of the bag onto the ground, and with a clanking sound, a pile of springs appeared on the ground. There were at least 100 of them, ranging from the size of a pinky finger to the size of an ordinary person's fist to the size of an aboriginal's fist. Not only were there single-strand torsion springs, but there were also double-strand torsion springs and various other types of torsion springs. When this pile of springs was poured onto the ground like a pile of garbage, everyone in the Zhang family was immediately dumbfounded. Impossible! Zhang Junzheng stared at the pile of springs on the ground and almost cried out. He suddenly had the illusion that springs, which were a secret of the Zhang family, were actually everywhere, and only the Zhang family was kept in the dark. Not only him, but even the craftsmen in the east courtyard who were looking over also cried out in surprise. Soon after, a few dark-skinned craftsmen in their 40s or 50s quickly rushed over to the pile of springs and began to examine them. As they examined them, they exclaimed, "This is impossible. How can there be so many of them? How can they be so small and have such elasticity? Look, this is double strand. It turns out that they can be made this way. Originally, if they were made too thin, the tension and elasticity wouldn't be enough. However, this problem can be solved with double or more strands. The combination of these strands can actually reduce the volume of the spring." After exclaiming in surprise, the craftsmen quickly sat on the ground and began to discuss. Looking at the performance of these craftsmen, Zhang Junzheng was in a trance. Ren Baqian looked at Zhang Junzheng with a smile. In fact, in his opinion, this thing was already common and could be seen almost everywhere. Clocks, cars, doors, locks. Only the Zhang family still treated it like a treasure. "Do you still want to compete?" Ren Baqian looked amiably at him. "Compete." Zhang Junzheng squeezed out a word from between his teeth. After that, a craftsman first installed the Zhang family springs on the crossbow and then loaded a short arrow. After that, a guard smashed down the wall, and there was an empty space between the two courtyards. After that, the crossbow was placed on one side and 3 layers of wooden targets were placed on the other side 100 steps away. Next was the test. There was a rocker arm next to the crossbow, and the spring could be twisted by shaking the rocker arm. An arrow was shot on each of the 6 and 9 rounds. The arrow pierced through 1 wooden target on the 6th round and 2 wooden targets on the 9th round. The arrow pierced deeply into the 3rd wooden target. Shaking the crossbow 9 times was the limit that the Zhang family could achieve. The arrows shot from the crossbow could penetrate leather armor from a distance of 200 steps on the ground. The range was double that of Great Xia's crossbow battalion. At present, it could definitely be considered a sharp weapon. Even the high-ranking officials in the imperial court were surprised to see this performance. Hongwu, Shi Wanya, and the others had grave expressions on their faces. Previously, they had heard Zidonglai, the protector general of the Northeast, mention that the Yun nation now had a ballista that could shoot 100 bolts at a range of 200 steps. They didn't expect this crossbow to be made by the Zhang family. Chapter 582. Many of the people present wanted to laugh and felt inexplicably happy. There was a time when Dayo wanted to send people to other countries to learn things, but they couldn't. But now, Dayo wasn't strong in other aspects other than its military strength. However, those things that were regarded as treasures by other countries weren't so precious in the eyes of Dayo. This was especially true when comparing the treasures of the Zhang family to the pile of rubbish that Ren Baqian had poured out. Although the Zhang family was only a family in the Yun nation, according to Zhang Junzheng, they were deeply involved in all aspects of the Yun nation. By defeating the Zhang family in technology, it could also be said that they had defeated the Yun nation in technology in some ways. "Sir Ren, please," Zhang Junzheng said to Ren Baqian. Zhang Junzheng said to Ren Baqian. Now that he had placed all his hopes on this, there was no other way out. Next, he found 2 springs that were about the same size as the ones that the Zhang family had taken out from Ren Baqian's pile. He adjusted the internal dimensions of the crossbow that was as long as an arm and as wide as 2 palms and installed them. Following the first attempt, Zhang Junjing's heart skipped a beat when he fired the crossbow after swinging the arm 6 times. Although it also shot through a wooden target, the sound produced was much louder than the one at the Zhang residence, and the crossbow arrow pierced deeper as well. This showed that the elasticity of Rinpoche's spring was better under the same force. This made Zhang Junzheng start to panic. He had bet half of the Zhang family and brought out the best technology of the Zhang family. If they lost, the consequences would be unimaginable. The others ignored his thoughts and continued to test the torque of 9 revolutions. The bolts shot directly penetrated 3 wooden targets and stuck into the wall behind them. The result was obvious. We lost. Zhang Junzheng's eyes were a little blank. Could it be that there were really people in this world who knew everything? Could it be that the treasures of the Zhang family were really ordinary to others? He had always known that the Zhang family did the best. Even though they weren't well known, this was only because they kept a low profile. Whether it was the advanced crossbows or the various things that people used, they couldn't escape the shadow of the Zhang family. It could be said that it was almost impossible for a person in the Yun nation to not come into contact with the things made by the Zhang family from birth to death. This feeling of controlling everyone's lives was like controlling the lives of others, and the Zhang family had always been extremely proud of it. What made them even more proud was that no one could leave all of this, because the Zhang family was the best. But these 3 matches made him suddenly feel that the things that the Zhang family controlled, the things that the Zhang family was proud of, seemed to be child's play in the eyes of others. The faces of everyone in the Zhang family were covered with gray. Rinpoche smiled and said a few words to one of the guards beside him. That guard ran over and took out another crossbow. Imitating what the Zhang family did previously, he loaded the crossbow and rotated the rocker arm until it made 12 revolutions. This caused the eyes of the Zhang family members to twitch. One had to know that the Zhang family springs could only be twisted 9 times. Any more than that and it would snap. On the other hand, the opponent's spring had been twisted 12 times. Thud! A series of light sounds could be heard. Not only did the crossbow bolt pierce through 3 of the templates, it even hit the wall behind it and exploded. This power caused the eyes of Hong Wu and the others to twitch. This power could reach at least 300 steps away. Previously, Great Xiao's crossbow battalion had caused Dayo to lose a lot of blood. If the enemy were to master this kind of crossbow and shoot from a distance of 300 steps, it was unknown how many Aboriginal warriors would be sacrificed. Fortunately, this thing was made by Principal Run. Everyone had to admit that other than his combat strength, nothing could stump Rinpoche. All kinds of strange things could appear in his hands. As for the Zhang family, this was a scene that made everyone's face turn ashen. A full 12 revolutions of the torsion force. They didn't know how many years it would take for them to catch up. If they were lucky, it might take a few years or more. If they were unlucky, it might take half a lifetime or even a lifetime. Because of a coincidence or inspiration, they were able to improve in a certain aspect. This was because improving the torsion spring technique involved many aspects. Just the breakthroughs in materials and various techniques alone would take many years. And this improvement could be half a revolution, 1 revolution, or even 2 revolutions. A difference of 3 revolutions of torsion force could be said to be like the difference between heaven and earth. A huge breakthrough in a certain aspect was needed to achieve this. If there was a slight difference, everyone could still be somewhat confident. However, the gap in front of them was obvious that the other party was much more brilliant than them. That's all for the competition, the Empress said as she turned around and walked out without saying anything else. Many of the court officials came to watch the show. Now that the show was over, it was time for everyone to leave. After all, it wasn't a battle of knives and sleeves, so this kind of competition wasn't very attractive to everyone. It was far inferior to the battle between Tong Jinye and Qin Chuan at the top of the brothel. However, it wasn't as boring as they imagined. Tu Wan and the others remembered the cloth that Rinpoche died. Tong Jinye and Qin Chuan were still thinking about Rinpoche's wine, and Hong Wu, Shi Wanya, Li Qinxiu, and the people from the Ministry of War paid attention to the thing called the spring that Rinpoche made. Zhang Junzheng looked at everyone leaving. He opened his mouth, felt his throat dry, and couldn't make a sound. There was only one thing on his mind. Half of the Zhang family, half of the Zhang family. Mr. Zhang, do you have anything to say now? Rinpochian asked kindly. Zhang Junzheng was stunned for a long time. His face twitched a few times before he finally lowered his head and said, I admit defeat. He had no choice but to admit defeat. If he were to go back on his words, not only would his head be on the ground, but the reputation of the Zhang family would also be affected. Who knew how many people would be implicated? The extermination of Yi Ke's entire family in Qingfeng City was enough for everyone to recognize Dayo's methods. It's good that you admit defeat. That will save me some trouble. Rinpochian laughed. The implied meaning in his words made Zhang Junzheng shudder. He recalled the time when Rinpochian was the Honglu deputy. His methods were very insidious. He was far from being as harmless as he looked on the surface. Actually, you guys have benefited, so you don't have to look so sullen. Come, smile. Rinpochian laughed casually, but Zhang Junzheng and the others couldn't bring themselves to laugh. Go back first and stay for a few days. I will make arrangements for you after Her Majesty's birthday celebration. As for the rest of the Zhang family, Rinpochian stopped halfway, making Zhang Junzheng's heart tighten. Give me the list of names. In the future, those on the list will be from the Zhang family. As for those who aren't on the list, it's better not to be accidentally injured during the battle between the two armies, Rinpochian said in a soft and hard tone. Sir, Zhang Junzheng's face turned ugly. I will give you a chance. Rinpochian waved his hand and interrupted Zhang Junzheng. If you don't give me the list, how will I know who is from the Zhang family? The original bet was up to you to choose the content of the challenge, and you can prepare the materials as you wish. If you win, I will introduce you to Her Majesty. If you lose, you can live a stable life in Dayo and even ask me for advice. You can say that you have taken advantage of me. If you can't show me your sincerity, what's the point of keeping you around? Rinpochian said faintly. He didn't look at Zhang Junzheng anymore, yawned, and staggered out of the courtyard. Chapter 583. This bet that determined the fate of many people in the Zhang family set off a storm thousands of miles away. However, it didn't cause much of stir in Dayo. Even for those court officials who had witnessed it with their own eyes, the fact that he was proficient in all other aspects other than martial arts only left a deeper impression on them. It was only 3 days before the Empress's birthday celebration, and Lan City was starting to get lively. Although there weren't any envoys coming this year, and there were still battles in the northeast and southeast, the war didn't affect the residents of Lan City much. It wasn't because they didn't know the hardships of the front line, but because the Aboriginals have been fighting against the heavens, the earth, and all kinds of beasts since they were born decades ago. Fighting was already embedded in their bones, and it wasn't something that could be erased in just a few decades. In addition, 3 cities in the Yun Nation had been conquered recently. Carts of salt were transported back to replenish the salt shortage in Dayo's market. Taking advantage of this batch of salt and the Empress's birthday celebration, a large number of Aboriginals came to the foot of the mountain. Many of them traveled for a few days to Lan City, sweeping away the previous desolation in Lan City. In addition, Hong Wu and the rest had also returned recently, and many people would take a look outside Hong Wu's residence on the way. Rinpochian had seen this situation many times. He saw people looking at Hong Wu's residence from afar a few times and didn't know what they were talking about. He estimated that these people were probably saying, "I can replace you," or they were saying to their children, "Peter can replace you." In this case, Rinpochian even laughed for a long time after he imagined such a conversation. If someone had such a thought, he would definitely support it. Otherwise, when Hong Wu looked at her, he would always look at her with his nose and eyes looking at her. The palace was preparing for the next 3 days. Rinpochian got people to wrap pieces of red muslin around the trees and tie them into knots. From afar, the palace looked like a sea of red flowers. "It's a little wasteful," the Empress said faintly when she saw Rinpochian's actions. Although she rarely cared about these things, Rinpochian's actions still made her heart ache. Dayo didn't have the technology to weave cloth. All the cloth was transported from the other three nations, and the price wasn't low either. The palace was so big, and red flowers were everywhere. This was too extravagant. Do you like it? Rinpoche asked excitedly. The Empress had never done these things. Other than attending court to deal with political affairs, drinking, daydreaming, and her new hobby of watching television series, she rarely paid attention to other matters. There weren't many guards in this huge palace, and there were even fewer palace maids. It had always been cold and cheerless. After being tormented by him, it became much livelier. The Empress thought about it and liked it. She shifted her gaze to the side and said, "It seems like you are going to empty out the palace treasury. Only in this way can I be worthy of His Majesty. Besides, if we use it this year, we can use it next year and the year after that. It won't be considered extravagant anymore." Rinpoche laughed and said, "I have earned some money from selling glass cups and glasses these days. It's barely enough to cover my expenses." Before the opening of this shop, the glass factory had already stored a lot of glass cups. The opening of the royal glass shop had triggered a frenzy of buying. These crystal-clear cups and bowls only cost 15 taels of silver. Which of the big shots in the imperial court wouldn't buy a dozen or 20 of them? In just half a month, the glass shop made more than 30,000 taels of silver, which were used by Rinpoche to purchase red muslin to decorate the palace. After hearing what he said, the Empress didn't say anything else. In fact, most of the time, the Empress didn't care about what Rinpoche did. She would only watch quietly from the side and wait for the results. Even though she felt a little cold at times, most of the time, it was a kind of indulgence. Even after watching so many television shows, the Empress didn't know how to express her feelings. In other words, if she expressed her feelings to others, it would make her feel too shy. This kind of indulgence was her way of expressing her feelings. Rinpoche was well aware of this. Therefore, he would sometimes deliberately tease the Empress. Of course, most of the time, he would be sent flying with a kick from the Empress. 3 days passed in a flash. During these 3 days, all the palace maids and guards were tormented by him. As a result, the color of the entire palace changed. Even when Xianjia was patrolling the palace, she would raise her head from time to look at the treetops that were full of red flowers. Even though she looked like a man most of the time, in fact, there were times when she was meticulous. Rinpoche only finished decorating the entire palace at noon on the day of the Empress's birthday celebration. Rinpoche went back and changed into a set of blue ceremonial robes. This was the color of ceremonial robes for rank 4 officials. At this time last year, he was dressed like a prairie. Thinking about it, all of this should have started on this day last year. It was exactly 1 year. Moreover, it was the Empress's birthday celebration. This was a good thing. It saved him the trouble of remembering all kinds of anniversaries. Almost all of them were on this day. If possible, it would be best to set his wedding on this day as well. Rinpoche's thoughts drifted as he rushed to the Empress's palace. The Empress was dressed in a red robe and sitting on a stool. In front of her was the mirror with the words, "If the heavens didn't give birth to your majesty, the ages would be like a long night." Beside her was a dressing table. Meanwhile, Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan were helping the Empress dress up. Rinpoche's eyes lit up when he saw the Empress sitting there. There was a golden phoenix spreading its wings on the Empress's red robe. When Rinpoche first returned from Great Xia, he ordered it from a cosplay shop. However, the Empress was wearing it today. In addition, Rinpoche saw that absolutely beautiful and slightly cold side profile. If this painting of a beauty dressing up was drawn, it would definitely be a treasure handed down from generation to generation. Unfortunately, Rinpoche was very confident in his drawing skills. If he drew a painting of a beauty dressing up for the Empress today, he was afraid that he would be beaten to death on a day like this. If Jack on the Titanic had his drawing skills, there wouldn't be so many stories later on. Rinpoche took out his camera and took a picture of this absolutely beautiful scene. Then, he walked behind the Empress and carefully watched how Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan put the Empress's hair in a bun. Dressing up a beauty was also a pleasure, and Rinpoche was quite interested in learning how to do it. Are you done with those things? The Empress looked at Rinpoche behind her in the mirror. He had spent 3.5 days just for this half a day. Although it was very beautiful and she liked it very much, she still felt that Rinpoche was a little too idle. It was time for him to pick up his martial arts skills from tomorrow onwards. Your Majesty's beauty today is truly heaven-defying. Rinpoche looked at the person in the mirror and exclaimed in admiration. He didn't know if beauty was in the eye of the beholder, but he felt that the Empress was getting more and more beautiful. If Your Majesty's beauty was 9, 8 in the past, it would be 9. 9 today. I gave you 0. 1 less because I was afraid that you would become arrogant. After Rinpoche finished speaking, both Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan pursed their lips and laughed. Chapter 584. After the Empress finished grooming, the two of them sat facing each other in the bedroom and smoked e-cigarettes. A large amount of smoke came out of their mouths and enveloped both of them. The reason why the Empress liked e-cigarettes was because they were sweet. Furthermore, they were cold. The two of them ate one mouthful after another, as if they were eating snacks. The entire hall was filled with a fruity and milky fragrance. From time to time, the Empress would raise her head to look outside through the glass. She was tempted to go out for a walk, but after thinking about the hot weather outside, she gave up on this idea and stayed in the bedroom peacefully. When Xing arrived, she could only see their silhouettes at the door. This wasn't the first time she saw such a scene, so she wasn't surprised. After estimating that it was about time, Rinpoche bade farewell and went to check on other arrangements. He only strolled to Xingqing Palace Hall in the evening with his hands behind his back. Whether it was the Empress's birthday celebration or the year-end banquet, they were all held here. Although it was called a palace hall, it was actually a huge palace hall. However, only the main hall was used for banquets and banquets. The other halls had been abandoned for a long time. Even though there were people cleaning them from time to time, they were still a little old. When Rinpoche entered the main hall, many people were looking up and studying the light belts above their heads. Rinpoche could now carry 1,200 kilograms of items at a time, so it was much easier to carry items. During this period of time, he had brought many light belts to install in the main hall. At this moment, the light belts flickered in the air, making the entire main hall look like a fairy tale world. Rinpoche's entrance attracted the attention of some people. After nodding in acknowledgement, he found his seat and began to wait. Occasionally, he would chat with Feng Ho. Feng Ho was very interested in the wine and springs that Rinpoche and the Zhang family had bet on. In particular, the springs that could be made into crossbows would be a great weapon. Unfortunately, such springs couldn't be made in this world yet. Whether it was the materials or the craftsmanship, it couldn't be achieved. As for the wine, Rinpoche was also preparing to build his own winery for the imperial family. After all, the market for hard liquor in this world was huge and the profits were huge. Furthermore, it wasn't suitable to expand in a short period of time. Especially in Dayo, the grain production hadn't reached the point where it could be used to produce wine. Rinpoche was prepared to bring out cotton and textile craftsmanship. After talking to Feng Ho for a while, Gu Yihong also joined in. Rinpoche and a few ministers from the Ministry of Works formed a small circle and whispered to each other, attracting the attention of many people. Unknowingly, Tang Jinye appeared behind them and listened for a long time. He couldn't help but ask, "Principal Run, do you want to take up a position in the Ministry of Works? It's a pity that you didn't come to the Ministry of Works with your talent." "Sir Tong." Rinpoche turned around and greeted him. "As for going to the Ministry of Works, forget it." After another 15 minutes, Shi Qing, Hongwu, Shi Wanya, and the others arrived one after another. After they sat down, the Empress, who was dressed in a bright red Han costume, slowly entered the hall with Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan. After greeting each other, the Empress took her seat in the seat of honor before slowly sitting down, following which the maids outside the hall brought in the dishes one after another. Everyone's gaze immediately fell on Rinpoche's face. The dishes from last year's birthday celebration had left a deep impression on everyone. Many people didn't really have a taste of it that time. As soon as the dishes were served, everyone immediately thought of him. They wanted to see something from his face so that they could be mentally prepared. Rinpoche's good-natured smile made everyone feel more at ease. This year, they were all on the same side, so it should be the same as in previous years, right? However, as soon as the first dish was served, everyone's face immediately turned black. There was a whole blood sausage coiled together on a plate. Of course, Rinpoche knew what it was, but the others didn't. Seeing this, they lost their appetite. When the second dish was served, everyone had the urge to draw their knives and hack Rinpoche. There was a neatly roasted sheep's penis and 2 sheep's eggs on the plate. How were they supposed to eat this thing? Were they supposed to let people chew on it? However, this thing didn't taste right no matter how they ate it. Just the thought of everyone in the hall eating the sheep's penis in an orderly manner was too beautiful. Many people craned their necks to look at the Empress and realized that her dishes were completely different from theirs. They immediately stared at Rinpoche with murderous expressions. The third dish was soup. It was a copper bowl with a bat the size of 2 palms swimming in it. This bat's soup immediately made everyone lose their appetite. The fourth dish looked pretty good and smelled very fragrant. Everyone looked at the food in the bowl with uncertainty. The food in the bowl seemed to be edible, right? In fact, this dish was considered a famous dish. When Rinpoche saw it for the first time, he couldn't eat it. However, after being persuaded by others to eat it, he realized that it tasted pretty good. The fifth dish, a bowl of raw beef mince. The sixth dish, a crooked roasted water snake. Seeing the sixth dish, everyone finally felt that there was at least one dish that was edible this year. Then, they continued to stare at Rinpoche with murderous eyes. Are you trying to pick a fight with us? Are you not done yet? Rinpoche felt rather wronged. This year, he only provided 3 dishes on the menu, which were the braised meat, roasted sheep's penis, and blood sausage. The other dishes, such as the bat soup, raw beef mince, and roasted water snake, were all developed by the Imperial Kitchen. He didn't know if the Imperial Kitchen had chosen the wrong skill, but they actually developed several types of dark cuisine. Usually, the dishes made by the Imperial Kitchen were eaten by the Empress and Rinpoche. Even if they developed something, there was no one to share it with. Now that there were so many people present at the Empress's birthday celebration, they brought out all their tricks. This time, it really didn't have much to do with him. At most, it was only 50% related. The Empress looked at everyone's expressions, looked at the food on the table, and then looked at her own. She then ignored them. In any case, the food that she ate didn't seem to have any problems. Following that was the inscription. It wasn't too innovative and was just a routine. Rinpoche took the opportunity to look around the hall. As expected, Li Fu didn't come. In any case, Li Fu was the world's most powerful expert, and it was reasonable to invite him. He didn't know if Li Fu really didn't like this kind of environment, or if he didn't want to see Qin Chuan, Tong Jinya, Tu Wan, and the others. He directly rejected the invitation. Just now, he sent someone to invite him again, but it seemed that he didn't come. After the Empress drank the first cup of wine, a group of young Jing tribe girls entered the hall and danced. These young Jing tribe girls all had silver bells hanging on their waists. As they danced, the silver bells rang continuously and were extremely pleasing to the ear. Their dance was also different from the wildness of the Aboriginal girls. It was filled with a gentle beauty and had a different kind of flavor. At least, Rinpoche quite liked this kind of dance. It looked good whether they wore clothes or not. Chapter 585. The jade egg that Hong Wu presented last year could be considered a rare treasure. The 100 Beauties painting was also considered pretty good. Naturally, there was also the mirror that Rinpoche presented. Rinpoche didn't know if there would be another gift like last year. Many people looked at Hong Wu first. According to the usual practice, Hong Wu would present his gift first. Some people also looked at Rinpoche. He had a lot of strange things, and they didn't know what he could take out. The general-in-chief who supports the nation, Hong Wu, presents 100 sets of armor and 2,000 sabers. The gift wasn't as expensive as last year's, but it wasn't cheap either. 100 sets of armor were worth 10,000 gold, and 2,000 sabers were not cheap either. This gift was worthy of Hong Wu's status. It was just that the things that Hong Wu took out last year were too shocking, so it was inevitable that everyone had a little hope in their hearts. However, Hong Wu had been stationed at the border for a year and couldn't move at all. All his thoughts were on Great Xia, and he didn't have the energy to search for rare treasures for the Empress. Great Elder Shi Qing presents 3 pieces of Mongolian bee skin and 2 stalks of green sunflower. Junior Elder Zhikohai presents 3 tails of cloud crystals. Everyone turned their heads to take a look. 3 tails of cloud crystals were priceless. They didn't expect that Zhikohai's gift this year will be much more valuable than Hong Wu's and Shi Qing's. However, Zhikohai's expression didn't change in the slightest, and the crowd couldn't see anything from his expression. Next were the congratulatory gifts from the 6 ministers, Shi Wanya and Li Qianqiu. Basically, they were all rare treasures, similar in value to the items Shi Qing had taken out. Most of the items sent were directly stored in the warehouse. Only 1 or 2 items were left for display. The other rare treasures were displayed in front of the hall before being sent to the inner treasury. The principal of the Black Bamboo Academy, Ren Baqian, presents the Heaven's Proud Beauty painting. Following the voice, 2 people carrying a 6-meter-tall, 3-meter-wide painting appeared in front of the hall. In the painting, a woman in red stood on a high peak with her hands behind her back, looking down calmly. Everyone could see the cold and threatening aura coming from the woman in the painting. This painting naturally depicted the Empress. The heavenly beauty was also referring to the Empress. This was the proper meaning. However, the most surprising thing was that the Empress in the painting looked like a real person. It was impossible to tell that it was a painting. People had always said that it was lifelike, but after seeing this painting, everyone knew what it meant. It wasn't drawn, it was printed. Everyone exclaimed in admiration. They didn't know how Ren Baqian did it. At a glance, the Empress could tell that the painting was a photograph. This made her slightly disappointed. She originally thought that he would be able to come up with something that she liked, but she didn't expect that it would just be an enlarged photograph. Although the angle of the photo was very good, and she was very beautiful in the photo, she could naturally fool others. However, she had seen a lot of people on Earth. Even she would use her phone to take photos. However, when she thought about how Ren Baqian had been preparing for the bet with the Zhang family and how he had been busy decorating the palace, she decided to put this matter aside for now. Your Majesty, there's more to this painting than that. Ren Baqian stood up and smiled. Oh, the Empress's eyes lit up. The rest of the people also revealed looks of interest as they carefully examined the painting, trying to figure out the mystery behind it. Ren Baqian gestured for someone to bring in the painting. The painting, which was 6 meters tall, was even taller than the door of the palace hall. They had to lift it halfway to bring it into the palace hall. As the painting got closer, everyone began to realize that there were thin lines on the painting that divided it into lattices. This was a painting that was pieced together by the lattices. When the painting passed in front of everyone exclaimed when they saw the back of the painting. This made the people in front curious. What exactly did they see? Ren Baqian asked someone to hold the painting 4 meters in front of the Empress and slowly turned around. When she saw the north side of the painting, even the Empress revealed a look of surprise. Her eyes sparkled like a lake that was blown by the wind. Behind the painting were palm-sized photos of the Empress. Every frown, every smile, and every frown were included. Countless palm-sized photos were all of the Empress. Ren Baqian chuckled. On the back of this painting were 1,200 photos of the Empress, and on the front was a picture of the Empress that was formed by 1,200 jigsaw puzzles. The back of each photo was a jigsaw puzzle piece. More importantly, the 1,200 photographs in this painting were arranged in chronological order. Almost all of the Empress's changes over the past year could be seen in them. Even a blind person would be able to tell that the closer to the bottom of the painting, the gentler the Empress's expression became, and the coldness from her body became less. Even a blind person could see these changes. In the eyes of others, this painting could already be said to be priceless. Even though the Empress knew that these were photos, she also felt that Rinpochian had put in a lot of thought into it. She had spent almost all her time on these photos, as if they represented her life over the past year. This feeling was very wonderful. In addition, this painting also hides a secret, Rinpochian continued. After hearing what he said, everyone was curious. This painting could already be said to be exquisite, and they didn't know what other secrets were hidden in it. I have hidden all my life's knowledge in this painting. After this, I will divide this painting into 1,200 pieces and distribute them throughout Dayo and even the Yun Nation so that everyone in the world can see Your Majesty's face. If someone collects these 1,200 pieces, they will be able to find a location where I have hidden all my life's knowledge and obtain it. Rinpochian winked at the Empress at the end of his speech. The Empress didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and the little bit of emotion she felt earlier had completely disappeared. Did you find a place to hide a set of mathematics, physics, and chemistry textbooks, and then let the whole world search for them? Let's not talk about the possibility of someone collecting all 1,200 pieces. If someone really collected all 1,200 pieces and found the mathematics, physics, and chemistry textbooks, they would probably beat you to death. However, except for the Empress, everyone else found it very interesting. Even though Rinpochian's martial arts weren't good, everyone could see his other abilities. They also recognized him. If someone could really learn all of Rinpochian's knowledge, he might really be able to make a career out of it. It was just a pity for this exquisite painting. I have also prepared some things that Your Majesty should like. After the ceremony, Your Majesty and all the officials can follow me out to see the things that I have prepared. For the rest of the time, everyone didn't have the mood to think about what else Rinpochian had prepared. They had to admit that Rinpochian was really clever. At least, no one could have imagined that he could actually do this with that painting. After the ceremony, everyone followed Rinpochian to the open space behind Xingqing Palace Hall and saw that the ground was filled with all kinds of things. Once the Empress saw the things on the ground, she knew what Rinpochian had prepared. Your Majesty, it's your turn to light it. Rinpochian took a torch from a guard and handed it to the Empress. He then pointed to a thin line on the ground. The Empress lit the fuse on the ground. A spark quickly rolled on the ground and then scattered to dozens of fireworks. Bang! Fireworks rose into the sky, blooming with colorful lights in the sky. The entire lawn city was alarmed by the fireworks at this moment. Countless people were alarmed by the colorful flowers that suddenly bloomed in the sky. Look, it's flowers. What beautiful flowers. It's on top of the palace. One by one, people walked out of their houses and looked up at the fireworks that appeared in the sky of Dayo for the first time. The fireworks also lit up everyone's faces. Everyone was amazed by the beauty of the fireworks. Balls of light soared up from the palace and bloomed in the sky. In the palace, in addition to the fireworks that soared into the sky, there were also many fireworks on the ground. It was magnificent, stunning everyone. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan followed behind the Empress and looked at the fireworks in the courtyard and the fireworks in the sky with ripples in their eyes. The Empress was completely immersed in this sea of fireworks. Chapter 586. The Empress's birthday celebration this time was sensational. The commoners didn't know anything about the palace, but they saw the blooming fireworks in the sky. This was the first time everyone had experienced such beauty. Many people in the city were looking up at the flowers in the night sky, admiring their beauty. Until the next day, many people were still discussing what the flowers that appeared in the palace were. However, another explosive piece of news came out very quickly. Rinpochian, the principal of the Black Bamboo Academy, had hidden everything he had learned in a painting. He then divided the painting into 1,200 pieces and sent them out of the city. As long as someone found these 1,200 paintings, they would be able to find out what principle Run had learned in them. Do you want fame, wealth, and status? Do you want to know the mysteries of this world? If you want, I can give them to you. Go and find them. I have placed everything there. This sentence was heard by many people. The most interesting part was the phrase, "the mysteries of this world," which made many people daydream. However, the ones who were most interested weren't the Aboriginals, but the Zhang family. When this news came out, Zhang Junjung immediately inquired about the whereabouts of the paintings. However, this was Dayo and not the Yun nation. The Zhang family was powerless even if they wanted to. Next was the Jing tribe, who had a higher degree of recognition toward Rinpoche. After coming out, they heard many rumors about Rinpoche and were very interested in everything he said. It was a pity that the Jing tribe only had influence in Tianjin Basin. As for the Aboriginals, their minds were still focused on their fists. However, each of the 1,200 paintings was a portrait of His Majesty, and many people were tempted by them. It was every Aboriginal's wish to obtain a portrait of the Empress as a treasure. As a result, Rinpoche's joke really caused quite a commotion. On the second day of class, 3 idiots immediately asked for leave. "The world is so big. I want to see... Oh no, I want to find a treasure map." Then, these 3 idiots were hung on the flagpole by Rinpoche. "Teacher, what was that in the sky last night?" Many people looked at Rinpoche with sparkling eyes, especially those female students. Even Tonglan was the same. Beautiful things were more attractive to women. Fireworks, fireworks, fireworks. You will learn about it in the future. Rinpoche smiled as he stood on the podium. When the students heard this, they immediately became excited. This was much more interesting than mechanics and optics. Even many male students wanted to find a girl and then put such fireworks in front of her. Would anyone be able to reject them? By the way, I will bring a new teacher to you tomorrow. Be mentally prepared, Rinpoche said before the class ended. A new teacher? Everyone was astonished. Yes, new teacher, you will like it. All right, school is over. Rinpoche strolled back home. The robot company had promised to deliver the goods in 3 months, but it took a full 8 months before they finally delivered the goods the last time he went back. If they still didn't deliver the goods, Rinpoche was prepared to show them why the flowers were so red. However, after receiving the goods, Rinpoche felt that his 8 months of waiting hadn't been in vain. However, he still needed to bring back a lot of fireworks, so the robot was temporarily placed in the room. When he returned to Dayo the next morning, not only was there a robot by his side, but there was also a flying motorcycle. Over the past 2 years, Earth's technology had progressed very quickly. It could be said that after the Industrial Revolution, the progress of technology was getting faster and faster. Recently, it had already reached the point where a person who had left society for a few years would find himself completely obsolete and unable to understand many things around him. 2 years ago, there were only trials of driverless buses, but this year, they could already be seen in many places. Identity cards had become cell phones. The bank had also become an unmanned bank, completely intelligent. The speed of change was so fast that even Rinpoche found it a little strange. The same was true for flying motorcycles. The earliest flying motorcycles could only fly for 40 minutes and were at a height of 4 to 5 meters. The latest model that Rinpoche had gotten his hands on could already fly for 2 hours and was at a height of 8 meters. Rinpoche couldn't help but get one to play with. After returning to Dayo, Rinpoche rode the flying motorcycle above the palace and headed toward the Empress's quarters. When the flying motorcycle rose into the sky, the guards of Pingle Park were shocked. However, they knew that it was Rinpoche and didn't have any extreme reactions. Soon after, they were dumbfounded as they watched Rinpoche fly away in the sky. However, not long after Rinpoche flew, he heard someone shouting in front of him, "Who are you? Come down." Soon after, a figure with a bright sword slashed at him. This scene almost scared him to death, and he hurriedly shouted loudly, finally letting the other party recognize his identity. However, it was easy to draw the sword, but difficult to retract it. The other party finally managed to retract the sword in midair, but he couldn't stabilize his body and collided with Rinpoche after a series of chaotic sounds. The flying motorcycle crashed to the ground. Rinpoche and Xian collided into each other and fell to the ground in a daze. Xian jumped out of Rinpochien's arms in panic. Soon after, she calmed down and glared at Rinpochian. Sir Rin, next time you do such strange things, at least let me know first. I can retract the sword this time, but I can't retract it every time. Rinpochian lay on the ground and felt pain all over his body as if it had fallen apart. He couldn't even feel the warm and fragrant body in his arms at all. He wanted to cry, but had no tears. He was riding the flying motorcycle and was almost struck down by someone. This time, he finally understood Green Bead's feelings when she was shot down by the Empress. Flying was dangerous, and one had to be cautious when taking off. I say, can't you take a good look before you strike someone? It's only a few meters high and at such a slow speed. You can't possibly not see it, right? Rinpochian complained. Xian just stood in front of Rinpochian. Her expression changed a few times before she snorted and said, I can't even see things 10 steps away. Therefore, Sir Rin should be more careful in the future. Are you nearsighted? Rinpochian was surprised. He didn't expect nearsightedness to exist in this world. Even though he hadn't interacted much with Xianzhou in the past, they had met quite a few times in the palace. This was the first time he knew that she had a vision problem. What was even more surprising was that she could actually become the commander of the palace guards with a vision problem. Oomph. Xian just snorted and walked away with a black face. Even though she didn't know what Rinpochian was talking about, she could keenly sense that he was talking about her vision problem. After all, Rinpochian said the word vision. Rinpochian lay on the ground and thought about Tongyu. Even a blind person could become the third most powerful expert in the world. It wasn't surprising that Xianzhou became the commander of the palace guards. After Xianzhou left, Rinpochian was sent back to Pingle Park dejectedly by the guards. Not long after, the Empress received the news and came over to see him. She wanted to laugh when she saw that his head was wrapped in bandages. She then said with a smile, Xianzhou's vision isn't very good. Next time, let her know if there's anything, and this won't happen. She should be able to get a pair of myopia glasses, right? Rinpochian asked thoughtfully. I don't really understand. There's no such thing as myopia in Dayo. However, you could bring her over to see if there's a solution. The Empress cared a lot about this loyal and devoted commander of the palace guards. It would be great if Xianzhou could regain her vision. Chapter 587. After taking the medicine, the bandage on Rinpochian's head could finally be removed. However, his arm was still in a splint. Even if he were to use the ointment from this world, it would still take a few days to recover from the fracture. He then asked someone to carry the robot's box to the academy. Although this would damage his prestige as a great teacher, it couldn't be helped. When Rinpochian arrived, all the students were there, discussing the new teacher who would be coming today and why Yagüe was late. This was the first time since the establishment of the academy that he was late. Many people guessed that it had something to do with the new teacher. When Rinpochian arrived with a splint on his arm, all the students looked a little strange. Rinpochian was in the palace every day, and with his status, no one dared to offend him. How could his arm be broken? Needless to say, it was most likely done by Her Majesty. Rinpochian immediately became the image of a victim of domestic violence in the eyes of all the students. Well, it was delightful and satisfying. Open the box. Rinpochian asked the guard to open the box, revealing a white and blue armored Gundam. It was about 2 meters tall and weighed about 160 kilograms, which was about the same as an ordinary person. The weight was mainly in the core, and the outside was only a layer of steel frame and iron sheet. Rinpochian pressed the back of the robot's head, and it emitted a sound similar to a computer case. Then its eyes turned blue. You will be their teacher in the future. Get to know them, Rinpochian said. My name is Gundam. An electronically synthesized voice came from the robot's body, and it slowly stood up from its original position of hugging its knees. What a beautiful armor! Many students immediately exclaimed. Teacher, is it human? Some people were puzzled because the Gundam's movements were very strange and stiff. No matter how they looked at it, it wasn't because of the layer of armor. Although these students didn't have the concept of a robot, They could easily see that it didn't have a trace of vitality. Whether it's human or not, it's your teacher and can answer your questions. Therefore, you need to respect it as a teacher, Rinpoche said as he stood on the podium. Now, you can ask some questions that you have encountered in the process of learning and let it answer them. After hearing Rinpoche's words, everyone suddenly realized that this thing really didn't seem to be human. But what exactly was this iron armor? He didn't give a lecture for half a day, allowing the students to ask Gao any question they wanted. Gao used the information stored in the database to answer them. Rinpoche listened for a while and had a rough idea of what was going on. Without being able to connect to the internet, the Gundam lost a large portion of its learning ability. Its answers were very stiff and were completely based on the information it had stored beforehand. There were textbooks and some articles from other sources. But the good thing was that it could also give some examples to illustrate the situation. Therefore, although it wasn't flexible enough, it was enough for now. The Gundam didn't move for the entire morning. If it only answered questions, it wouldn't consume too much battery. By the time school ended, it still had 30% battery left. That morning, many students were very excited, but also very puzzled. Such a novel teacher would naturally make them feel excited. As for their doubts, they realized that the Gundam's communication with them didn't feel intelligent at all. It was very inflexible, but it was able to answer many questions. This made many students puzzled. When school was over, they still circled around the Gundam, reaching out to touch its outer shell. Go back, all of you. This is your teacher. You must respect him. Is it right for each of you to touch it? Do you think you are going to a brothel? Rinpoche's face darkened as he chased everyone back. He got someone to move the Gundam to another room. Just as Rinpoche entered, Li Fu followed him in a flash. He looked at the Gundam curiously and asked, "What is this thing?" "It can be considered as an auxiliary tool," Rinpoche replied after thinking for a while. "It's interesting. This thing can actually speak and even answer questions. If it wasn't for the fact that it doesn't have any signs of life, I would have thought that it was some kind of species. However, to be able to make such a thing, it can be considered a superb workmanship." Li Fu clicked his tongue in admiration. This thing couldn't even fool the students, let alone the world's #1 expert, Li Fu. "I'm just curious. How exactly does this thing speak and answer questions?" Li Fu circled around the Gundam a few times and reached out with his dirty big hands to touch its body. "Senior, if you continue to stay in Dayo, you will know how to do it in the future." Rinpoche laughed. "Senior, when are you going to teach me that godly rod? Where's the heaven that you promised me?" "This kid is full of lies," Li Fu immediately spat. "This thing can't be made just like that, right? I'm already preparing it." "Just wait for a few months," Rinpoche said. "In that case, I will wait. If you continue to make such a mess every day, I will find trouble with you." Li Fu thought about it and touched the Gundam again before leaving with a look of admiration on his face. Rinpoche pondered for a while after Li Fu left. With his strength, he could bring a hot air balloon back. However, it wasn't completely impossible to make a hot air balloon in this world. If it was possible, he would rather make things that could be made in this world. After all, this was the only way for technology to progress little by little. If even things like hot air balloons were to be brought over from Earth, there wouldn't be much meaning. The cloth was relatively easy to make as long as it was sturdy enough. In any case, he wasn't going to make this hot air balloon fly into outer space. As long as it could make Li Fu go around in the sky, it would be fine. The main problem was the airtightness of the hot air balloon. This required him to find a rubber-like substance in this world and apply a layer of it on the cloth to achieve such an effect. Rinpoche immediately went to the Ministry of Works to look for Tongjinya and asked him to help find something that was similar to rubber. Over the next few days, even though there wasn't much progress on the rubber aspect, the bunch of stupid students at the academy finally made a decent steam engine. Although it was a relatively primitive steam engine that was used to lift water, this was already a breakthrough. Furthermore, this was a reciprocating power machine that converted the energy of steam into mechanical work. Its appearance in this world could be said to be an important step forward. Rinpoche immediately summoned the Empress and the big shots of the imperial court to Black Bamboo Academy to see the results of these students. When they heard that the Empress and the big shots of the imperial court would be coming, many of the students were so excited that their faces turned red. One had to know that other than Tong Lan and Shurgan, the rest were commoners and people who weren't valued by their families. Before entering the academy, they could already be considered as people who had been abandoned. Well, had they ever been valued so highly? Not only would the Empress be coming, but the big shots of the imperial court would also be coming. One couldn't blame them for putting the Empress first. It was simply too easy for Rinpochian to invite the Empress. On the contrary, the arrival of the big shots of the imperial court made them feel that they were valued even more. Chapter 588. Straighten your backs. Even though you are only students of the academy and don't have an official position, you are already the pioneers of this world. You still don't know what this steam engine will bring. However, after a few years or more, you will be remembered in the history of this world. Each and every one of you will be remembered in the history books by future generations. Your greatness is second only to mine, and my greatness is second only to Her Majesty. Rinpochian said resolutely to the students in front of him. The carriage of the Empress and the ministers was only 10 minutes away from the academy. However, he saw that the students were feeling apprehensive after the excitement and didn't know if this steam engine would be appreciated by those big shots. After all, the function of this steam engine was to lift water, and Tong Lan could lift water much faster than the steam engine. However, Rinpochian understood the value and significance of the steam engine better than all of them. The Industrial Revolution began on Earth after the invention of the steam engine. Even though the technology of this world hadn't reached this stage, the steam engine was only a toy for the people of the academy. However, under his impetus, the Industrial Revolution would inevitably come. The students subconsciously puffed out their chests when they heard what he said, but burst out laughing when they heard the last sentence. Even though your talents, in the traditional view of the Aboriginals, aren't at the junior high level and can even be classified as trash. However, you have to remember that there are many fists as big as a casserole, and they are everywhere. There aren't many people who can use their brains. Those who use their brains govern others, and those who use their strength govern others. Rinpochian continued. Teacher, do you think it's mental or physical? Shurgan asked. What do you think? Of course it's mental. Rinpochian glanced at him and saw the smirk on his face. What about Her Majesty? It's also mental. Then why is teacher the one who governs others? Tong Lan asked with glowing eyes. It looked like they would jeer if he didn't give a good answer. Of course, it's because Her Majesty is wise and brave. Rinpochian grinned. He couldn't possibly say that the key was that the Empress's fists were bigger. No matter where, force was very useful. The group of people laughed when they heard this. How do we compare to the scholars of Great Xia? A student asked. What the teacher teaches is different from what they teach. There are many types of scholars in Great Xia. Some of them are frivolous, while some of them govern the people and rule the world. As for you, you are the ones who push the world forward at a rapid pace and scare everyone off. When you open your eyes every day, you will see a different world. Rinpochian rubbed his chin and thought about the scholars in ancient China. On one hand, it was politics. On the other hand, it was technology. No matter from which angle he looked at it, he felt that technology was more useful, especially for a world. Only technology could make this world different. Sir Run is so ambitious. This old man wants to see what a new world looks like when I open my eyes every day. Tong Jinya's voice could be heard from outside the wall. He didn't know what kind of ears he had to be able to hear from so far away. Rinpochian waved his hand at the students, put his hands behind his back, and went to the entrance of the academy to welcome everyone. He saw Tong Jinya and Qin Chuan riding their mounts in front of him and looking at each other in disdain. He really didn't know how these two, the Minister of Works and the Minister of War, behaved as if they hated each other for stealing their wives. Behind them was the Empress's carriage. The other court officials were behind the Empress. As for Xianzhe and the other bodyguards, they were left far behind. Thinking about it, This group of people didn't need protection from others. It was already good enough that they didn't collect protection fees from others. Other than Li Fu, anyone who saw such a group of Cardinal Heaven experts would feel their scalp go numb. What good stuff do you have for us to see today? Tang Jingye winked when he saw Ren Baqian from afar. Qin Chuan also nodded as a form of greeting. Greetings, Your Majesty. Greetings, sirs. The Empress moved and appeared in front of the steps of the academy. She raised her head to look at the signboard of the academy and the surrounding walls. She rarely came here. The last time she was here, the walls were made of red bricks. Now, there were many green vines climbing up the walls and the red bricks, making them look much better. Let us see your results, the Empress said to Ren Baqian. Although she didn't really understand the steam engine, she had heard Ren Baqian talk about its importance during their daily chats. It could be said to be the beginning of modern industry on Earth. As a result, she was looking forward to seeing this steam engine. Your Majesty, sirs, please. Ren Baqian glanced at the crowd. Shi Qing and the others were among them. Many of them had unwelcomed children in the academy, and they wanted to see what these children had learned over the past 9 months. The so-called academy had always been a courtyard and a few houses, and it was still the same even now. Although the layer of vines made the academy look less simple and crude, it still looked like a primary school in the mountains to Ren Baqian. It could be said to be the simplest academy. The students in the courtyard were all gone. Ren Baqian led everyone to the backyard and saw a small pond with dozens of students standing near a strange thing. That thing was mainly made up of a large iron bucket, a wooden barrel, a wooden box, a mess of pipes and wooden poles, and a huge wheel. Is this what you made in a month? Tang Jingye moved closer to Ren Baqian and whispered. However, his whisper was almost the same as shouting at the top of his lungs, and everyone heard him. Tong Lan's face immediately turned black. In any case, they took more than a month to make this thing, but they were actually ridiculed by their grandfather. It's not me, it's them, Ren Baqian said, which made everyone's faces turn even darker. Just now, they said that they were pioneers and would be remembered in history. How could they cast them aside so quickly? They used to call her Xiao Tian Tian, and now they were calling her Madame Niu? However, don't underestimate this steam engine. The appearance of the steam engine here represents the beginning of a new era, Ren Baqian said. Demonstrate it, the Empress said faintly. Let them experience it. Ren Baqian turned his head and said to Tong Lan and the others. Previously, everyone was already prepared and filled the big iron bucket with water. When Ren Baqian said to start, they started a fire under the bucket to boil the water. Immediately, smoke billowed in the courtyard. Are they preparing to take a bath? Tang Jingye grinned. Sir Tong, you should just watch quietly. Ren Baqian shook his head. The others were also waiting to see what tricks they could play. Chapter 589. Hey, it's moving. Many people looked at the rotating flywheel and clicked their tongues. Obviously, no one moved those things, but the wooden rods and wheels actually moved on their own. As the water temperature began to approach the boiling point, the rods and flywheel rotated faster and faster, and the exhaust pipe of the cylinder began to emit red steam. The flywheel also began to coil the rope and lift the bucket that was previously placed in the pond. When it reached a certain height, the students would pour the water out and throw it back into the pond, repeating the process. This thing is actually moving on its own. Many ministers walked over to watch and found it interesting. After all, it didn't require manpower and could move on its own, which was quite novel. However, after more than 10 minutes of novelty, everyone lost interest. But what's the use of this? Someone began to raise doubts. Tang Jingye immediately shouted, You made this toy after more than a month? Although it looked quite novel, if they were to carry water, it would be much faster for them to do it themselves. Even the water wheel that you made previously is more useful than this. That's right. It looks interesting, but it's not very useful. The others were also making comments. They were somewhat astonished that Ren Baqian had created such a thing. This didn't really match his status. The things that Ren Baqian made in the past were quite surprising. How did he make such a thing with such great fanfare this time, and even invited everyone to see it? Old man, That's why I said that you have a long beard but short of knowledge. Is this a matter of a toy? Qin Chuan immediately mocked. However, his words also ridiculed a group of people. Many of the officials present glared at him, as there were many bald and bearded officials present. What do you understand now? Tang Jingye snorted. Qin Chuan had the attitude of opposing anything that Tang Jingye agreed with, and vice versa. This toy is quite interesting. The most important thing is that it was made by so many people. Previously, these students were just drinking and fooling around, but now they can make something like this. Not bad, not bad. Tang Jingye almost burst out laughing after hearing Qin Chuan's words. Ren Baqian's face immediately turned black. This old man might as well not have said anything. He turned to look at the group of students and saw that many of them looked gloomy. Obviously, the words of Qin Chuan and Tang Jingye had dealt a huge blow to the students who had finally made their first steam engine after more than a month. As for the others, most of their thoughts were similar to Tang Jingye's. Originally, when these students entered the school, they said that he was going to teach them the principles of all things in the world. Everyone was looking forward to it. But from the looks of it now, it was just SOSO. When Ren Baqian saw everyone's reaction, he was displeased. After thinking for a while, he realized his mistake. The role of the steam engine was very important, but these people did not understand it all. Without the knowledge of the later generations, how could they understand what the steam engine represented? You can only see that this thing can carry water, but this is just a prototype. In fact, this thing can do a lot of things. For example, you don't need a horn cow to drag a truck. Isn't that still a toy? We have countless horn cows in Dayo. If we can use them to pull the chariot, why do we need to use this thing? Tang Jingye really couldn't understand why Ren Baqian wanted to do this. One had to know that the solar furnace he had created in the past had played a huge role, as it could directly smelt iron ores. There was also well salt, which allowed Dayo to produce its own salt. Cement and red bricks also played a big role. Nowadays, the new steel-making furnaces outside the city were all made of cement and red bricks. They could also be used to build the city walls and houses. Compared to cutting rocks in the past, it saved a lot of manpower. But now, he really couldn't see any use for this thing. Not only him, but the others also deeply agreed with what he said. Only the old fox, Shi Qing, looked at Ren Baqian and gave him an unfathomable smile. The biggest role of the steam engine isn't just limited to one place, but it represents a new source of power. It can replace human and animal power, whether it was smelting, mining, or transporting goods. They originally required a lot of human and animal power to achieve. On the other hand, the steam engine can reduce human and material power to the minimum and increase speed to a higher level. This is the true meaning of the steam engine. For example, with the steam engine, we can develop a train. This thing can transport goods and people. Its speed is several times faster than the horn cows, and the load it can carry isn't something that the horn cows can compare to. One train can carry goods that can be pulled by hundreds or thousands of horn cows. How much manpower will be needed to pull goods from hundreds or thousands of horn cows? How much will the journey cost? How long will it take to reach the protectorate of the Northeast from here? As long as we improve the steam engine and create a train, it can travel day and night without stopping. Originally, it would take half a month to deliver goods, but now it will only take 3 days. If we mobilize rations and troops during wartime, what kind of advantage will this be? Ren Baqian said with a black face. He was actually looked down upon by this old man. He was actually looked down upon by a group of primitive people. This was simply unbearable. Is it like what you said? Tang Jingye asked suspiciously. Ren Baqian gritted his teeth and wanted to give this old man a kick. Have I ever lied before? You always lie, Tang Jingye replied without hesitation. When have I ever lied? That solar furnace and other things, which of them didn't achieve the effect that I said? Ren Baqian's eyes widened, and he really wanted to kick Tang Jingye's crotch. Old man, do you know that this is slander? Previously, you said that you would invite me to Yin restaurant. Tang Jingye stroked his beard with a look that said, You lied to me. The Empress's face turned green as she sent him flying with a kick. She then looked at Rinpochian with an unfriendly look. Qin Chuan grinned and laughed heartily. He was happy to see that old man in trouble. I really don't like to go to brothels, but he insisted on dragging me there. I had no choice but to brush him off. This is called a white lie. Rinpochian had a look of grievance on his face. The Empress glared at him and said, "When will you be able to realize those things that you said? After all, you can't see anything from this." She had some understanding of the train that Rinpochian mentioned, but the others couldn't imagine it at all. Only by making it for everyone to see would they change their minds. If it's fast, we can make a small steam train in 1 or 2 months. After we succeed, we can enlarge it and make a real train, Rinpochian said after thinking for a while. It wasn't difficult to make a small steam locomotive. As long as the steam engine was modified and the flywheel driven by the connecting rod was replaced by the train wheels, it would be done. It could be said that it was very easy for him to make it, but it would take some time for the students to do it. However, this kind of thing had to be done by the students so that they could grow. Therefore, Rinpochian's goal was to first modify the steam engine into a small locomotive that could run. Then, he would enlarge it according to the scale. In this way, after making the steam engine and the locomotive, the students would have a considerable understanding of the steam engine and physics. In the future, they would be able to learn or do other things much faster. In that case, I will wait to see all of you come up with the thing that you mentioned. The Empress nodded, following which, she looked at the students who looked a little sad and said, "Do it well. The future of Dayo depends on all of you." After hearing what the Empress said, many of the officials were a little surprised. One had to know that these words weren't said casually. They didn't expect the Empress to value these things so much that she actually said, "The future of Dayo depends on all of you." In their hearts, the future of Dayo was still in the hands of the talented children of the various families. Chapter 590. I heard that you have something that looks like a human and is wrapped in iron. Where is it? Let me take a look. Tong Jingye stayed behind and whispered to Rinpochian. He wasn't interested in the steam engine, but he was very interested in the robot from the academy. He had heard Tong Lan talk about it many times. "That's teacher Gauda from the academy," Rinpochian said with a black face. Rinpochian said with a black face. In any case, the steam engine created by his own student was of great significance to him. However, the others didn't think much of it. This made him feel a little embarrassed. At this moment, he especially disliked the 2 old fellows, Tong Jingye and Qin Chuan. "Where is it? Even if it's a teacher, I still want to take a look." Tong Jingye laughed. "He's been in seclusion recently and won't be receiving guests." Rinpochian decisively refused. "Just to take a look. You have quite a lot of good stuff, except for that toy." Tong Jingye recalled what Tong Lan said before and felt like a cat was scratching his heart. However, Rinpochian's face darkened even more after hearing that last sentence. "I already said that I won't be receiving guests. You want to see him? Wait for next time." Rinpochian chased Tong Jingye out. He turned around and went back to one of the rooms, only to see Li Fu touching the Gauda like a pervert who had seen a beauty. These days, Li Fu would come and touch it every day, which made Rinpochian feel disgusted. When he returned to the backyard, many students were cooling and inspecting the steam engine. "Stop what you're doing." Rinpochian stood nearby and said. Everyone immediately put down what they were doing and listened to him. "Did you hear what was said just now?" Rinpochian asked. "Her Majesty said that the future of Dayo depends on us." Du Laolu couldn't stop laughing. "Do you really believe in polite words?" Rinpochian snorted with a straight face. "Don't you have any shame? Her Majesty never says polite words." Du Laolu rolled his eyes. "What can these things you make be used for? To fetch water?" Rinpochian sneered. "Didn't you hear what the other officials said?" The faces of all the students, including Tong Lan, darkened when they heard this. The steam engine, which they had painstakingly learned for a long time and spent more than a month to make, was belittled as a toy. No one could accept it. Unwilling? You want to be praised and admired? You want to show them how powerful you are? Do you really want them to think that what you're doing is amazing? Do you want to achieve this? Rinpochian looked at everyone. Yes, someone said in a scattered voice. Me too. After all, you are my students. What you have learned is what I have imparted to you. If you're being looked down upon, it means that I'm being looked down upon as well, Rinpoche said unhurriedly. The knowledge of the steam engine is just the beginning. It represents a new power source. The next step is to transform the steam engine into something else, such as the train that I mentioned before. A train can pull hundreds of thousands of tons of goods. Furthermore, its speed was at least 3 times that of a horse carriage. As long as you can make something like this, no one will dare to look down on you. After Rinpoche finished speaking, everyone started to use their fingers to calculate how many tons were. Thanks to Rinpoche's mathematics class, these students could finally understand addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. However, they were shocked when they were done with the calculations. 1 ton of goods was 2,000 jin, so 1,000 tons of goods was 2 million jin. The load of a horse carriage was usually 3,000 to 5,000 jin. In other words, the train that Rinpoche mentioned could at least carry hundreds of horse carriages. More importantly, hundreds of horse carriages would consume a lot of rations. This was because the grass in some places wasn't suitable for livestock to eat and would cause stomach problems. Ordinary weeds could only prevent livestock from starving to death, but they lacked strength. Otherwise, the fork-horned cows wouldn't have the strength to carry goods for long distances. For example, baby asses. The Aboriginals would often break baby asses into pieces and mix them with fine grass for the fork-horned cows to eat. Therefore, when hundreds of horse carriages carried goods, there would be at least a dozen horse carriages carrying fodder and other things. A train could save this trouble. Many students had a better understanding of the function of neatness through the production of the steam engine. If they made a train, the ministers that came today would definitely change their opinions. After all, these students were still children. After being instigated by Rinpoche, they quickly became enemies. Even Tong Lan gritted her teeth and prepared to teach Tong Jinyel lesson. Go back and think about how to improve this steam engine. I can give you some hints on connecting rods, changing the direction of the force, and flywheels, Rinpoche said. You can also go and ask Teacher Gauda. It should know. After Rinpoche finished speaking, he strolled away. The rest of the students ran to ask Gauda about the train. Half a day later, a cry of alarm came from the room. Tong Lan, you broke Teacher Gauda. I just wanted to take a look. Who knew that I would dismantle it? What's inside? Don't pull me. I can just install it later. There's really no one inside. I've been wondering if there's a person or something else hiding inside. Du Lalio's exclamation could be heard. Are you stupid? This is obviously lifeless. However, it's really strange that it can speak without any life. Ah, Shurgan, you broke another piece. Tong Lan was the one who broke it. Since it's already broken, I might as well study it. Yagwei will kill all of you tomorrow. I'll install it later. He doesn't know who did it, so keep your mouth shut. If anyone leaks the news, I'll let you know what a punching bag's fist looks like. Tong Lan waved her small fist in the room and said fiercely, We'll share blessings and misfortunes. Don't you know what kind of person Yagwei is? If this matter is leaked, you won't be able to escape either. Everyone will be out of luck. Shurgan was smarter than Tong Lan and immediately pulled everyone into the war chariot. When Rinpoche came the next day, his face darkened as soon as he entered the room. He saw that the outer shell of Gauda had obviously been tampered with and then forcibly stuffed in. Rinpoche touched it, and those pieces of outer shell fell off. All the mechanical parts inside were exposed, and some of the wiring had been pulled off and randomly tied in knots. Clang! Rinpoche wanted to see what they did to Gauda, but the moment he touched it, Gauda's arm fell off and almost hit his foot. Teacher broke teacher, Gauda. A little Lolita's cry of surprise came from outside the door. Tong Lan stood at the door with her mouth slightly open and a shocked expression on her face. She was even pointing at Rinpoche. What happened? What happened? A group of people rushed to the door and stuck their heads out. Oof, are you guys itching for a beating? Rinpoche put on a fake smile. This group of bastards even learned how to frame others? Speak, who did it? Whoosh. A group of people stretched out their fingers and pointed at him in unison. Rinpoche's face darkened. You guys won't shed tears until you see the coffin. Someone, hang them on the flagpole. I'm going to shoot them for 50 minutes today. Chapter 591. Great Xia. Ever since they were defeated half a year ago, everyone in Great Xia was shaken. Even though they knew that the Aboriginals were good at fighting, they were still defeated by 50,000 soldiers after preparing for a long time. This was the first time in decades that the Aboriginals suffered such a huge defeat. Not to mention that the winged cavalry and Li Qianqiu's troops even plundered several cities within Great Xia's borders, causing a large region in the south to be in a state of panic. After the winged cavalry left, everyone in Great Xia felt an indescribable anger. Among the commoners, there was a surge of emotions, especially among the scholars. However, after half a year, the Xia did not take any action. This caused many people to be extremely disappointed, and they turned their attention to the imperial court. However, it wasn't that no one knew of the imperial court's current predicament, but even more people still directed their resentment towards the imperial court. After all, they had never been plundered by the barbarians in their hinterland. First, they suffered a great defeat. Then, the enemy troops ran amok in their territory, and they could do nothing about it. For the arrogant Great Xia, it was like rubbing their faces against the ground. Every day, you say that this is not the right time. You can't even help me with such a small matter. You can't even come up with a solution. What use do I have for you? Emperor Xia's roar rang out in the Grand Xia's conference hall. The guards outside the hall subconsciously shrank their necks. Over the past half year, the Xia Emperor had often been enraged, and this had become the norm. Almost every few days, someone in the palace would be beaten to death for angering the Xia Emperor. At the same time, ever since he had coughed up blood and fainted twice, his physical condition had worsened. The Xia Emperor, who originally only had a few hundred hairs, now had more than half of his hair turned white. His face was haggard, and his eyes were sunken in. Your Majesty, the imperial court is heavily taxed, and many places are already complaining about it. We can't increase taxes anymore. If they didn't raise taxes, it would be difficult to gather military rations and armaments. Moreover, the recruitment and training of new soldiers would take a long time. They wouldn't be able to move south for at least 2 years. Currently, the barbarians have the Yun Nation and the Qin Nation on the outside and Tianjin Basin on the inside. We won't be able to pacify the situation in a short period of time, so this is the best time for us to recuperate. After 2 years, we will be able to wipe them out in one fell swoop. An old man said calmly. He was already used to the emperor's frequent outbursts, so he was not afraid. He only sighed in his heart. The emperor, who could be considered valiant in the past, could not help but become like this as he grew older. Although outsiders did not know, but seeing the changes in the past 6 months, he felt that the emperor was becoming more and more muddle-headed. Fortunately, the crown prince was still valiant. After His Majesty passed away, the crown prince would be able to shoulder the overall situation. Looking at His Majesty's body, it would only take a few years. Wait. Every day, you all say that you want to wait. How can I continue waiting? Do you think I don't know what the people are saying about me? And you, Prime Minister? Xiao Bailong snorted heavily. His face had turned red and his eyes were bloodshot. Thinking of the news that had been sent back, he almost went crazy. Your Majesty, calm down first. It's not good for your body to be so angry. After vomiting blood twice and fainting, Xiao Bailong had fainted a few more times during this half a year. Everyone had no choice but to take care of the emperor's body carefully. Many things were hidden from him, but how could they hide it from him? Especially the revenge against Dayo, which had become a thorn in his heart. Your Majesty, those are just people with ulterior motives. If you get angry, you will fall into their trap, Qi Mingtang, who was known as the Prime Minister, said faintly. Oomph. Xiao Bailong snorted heavily again before saying, Nowadays, all sorts of monsters have emerged. Do they really think that Great Xia is doomed after just one defeat? Have you found out anything? Their organization is very strict. They caught some people and committed suicide by poisoning them. However, this subject has recently found some clues. After a few more days, we will most likely be able to find the person who is using these sinister tricks. Another middle-aged man said. This person's appearance was heroic, his face was white, and he had a long beard. He gave off a dignified feeling. I will give you another month. No matter what, you must find out who exactly is stirring up trouble, Xiao Bailong said. Then he covered his head with his hands. After throwing a tantrum, he immediately felt a splitting headache. At this moment, in the palace, a eunuch was walking to a certain place. Seeing that there was no one around, he dashed into the woods and found a small cylinder from a hidden place. There was a square box tied to the cylinder. After tapping on the box a few times, a countdown appeared on it. After doing all this, he stuffed the cylinder and box back to their original places, walked out of the hidden place, and went straight to the next place. Previously, it took him 2 months to send these things to the palace in batches and hide them in various places. Now, it was finally time to use them. He didn't know what these strange things were used for. However, he knew that something earth-shattering would definitely happen 8 hours later. All along, his mission had been for this moment. At the thought of this, his eyes seemed to glow. There were 5 other eunuchs and maids who did the same thing as him. For hours later, 2 of them changed their clothes according to the prearranged route and left the palace while hiding under a cart that was transporting meat to the palace. An hour later, another 3 people left using different methods. Only the last person was a maid who didn't have an outstanding appearance, but her eyes were extremely bright. She was unforgettable. She sat quietly in the courtyard, waiting to witness everything that was about to happen. Qinglian, I'm afraid that you will be scolded if Her Highness discovers you like this. A maid who passed by reminded her immediately when she saw her. In this cruel palace, many people didn't want to see this maid, who didn't fight for anything and only did her own thing. Let her be scolded. Qinglian smiled and combed her hair. Her smile was exceptionally bright. You? That maid was dumbfounded. She didn't understand what was wrong with her. Have you lost your mind? Hurry up and leave. If you don't feel well, go back to your room and rest. If that person calls you, I will help you. Thank you, elder sister Lingyu. Qinglian smiled again. However, I will be leaving a while. So, it's better not to have anything to do with me. If someone asks, just tell them directly. Leave? Where can you go? You're not thinking of committing suicide, are you? Are you crazy? Her Highness treats you well. Although there isn't much freedom in the palace, you have enough to eat and wear, and the work isn't heavy. Why can't you get over it? That maid was shocked. Qinglian's smile froze. Did I say that I wanted to commit suicide? Aren't you imagining things too much? However, he still smiled and kindly reminded her something big might happen in the palace in a while. Elder sister, you have to protect yourself. As he spoke, the cylinders hidden in secret places all over the palace suddenly exploded. Bang! Explosions sounded one after another. What's that sound? Someone go and take a look. At the same time, countless guards and maids rushed to the place where the explosion had just occurred. After running a few steps, they smelled a suffocating smell. One by one, they stood rooted to the ground and violently vomited as if they had been hit in the head by a sledgehammer. Some maids directly fell to the ground and fainted. This smell, which could only be found in the heavens and rarely in the mortal world, permeated the entire palace. Emperor Xia, who had just drunk a bowl of medicine and looked slightly better, was in his room when he heard the noise coming from outside. Before he could reprimand them, the smell entered the room through the window and into his nose. Chapter 592. Ah! Qinglian screamed like a girl who had been molested, but she felt that she was in a worse state than being molested. However, she was rubbing her skin hard at this moment, wishing that she could rub off a layer of skin. Thinking of the encounter in the great Xia dynasty's palace that day, she felt that she was a complete tragedy. She wanted to see what would happen in the palace and see the chaos there, but when it happened, she wished that she was never there. At that time, she even suspected that she would die from the stench. Fortunately, The palace was also in chaos at that time, and she managed to escape. However, she tragically discovered that the stench on her body couldn't be washed away no matter how hard she tried. She was constantly smelling the stench on her body, which almost drove her crazy. Haha, I didn't expect that Xia Bailong would end up like this. He died from the stench? This way of dying is really strange. He is the only emperor of the great Xia dynasty, and his name will definitely go down in history. A man's laughter suddenly came from outside the courtyard, and his voice was extremely cheerful. Hearing that voice, her ears twitched, and her face immediately turned pale. Sword! Qing Lian's face turned pale, and she grabbed her clothes to cover herself with one hand. She raised her other hand, and a white light pierced through the roof and fell into her hand. It was a 3-foot-long longsword. The blade was densely covered in fish scale-like patterns, and a red ribbon hung from the hilt. In the next second, she turned into a white light and rushed out of the house, shouting in the air, "Su Qing, you bastard, give me your life." Su Qing was shocked by her sword and quickly dodged. When the sword fell, everything in front of him was split into two. An old man next to him was shocked, and he stopped Qing Lian and said angrily, "What are you doing?" At this moment, Qing Lian's clothes were drenched by the water droplets on her body, and her hair was also wet. She looked like a beauty coming out of a bath. Although Qing Lian wasn't extremely beautiful, her eyes were extremely bright and spirited, and her temperament was outstanding. Although she looked angry, she was also extremely attractive. However, the old man and Su Qing smelled the stench that filled the air with her appearance, and their faces immediately turned green. "Don't stop me. I'm going to kill that bastard Su Qing. Why didn't you tell me?" Qing Lian gritted her teeth and drew her sword. "You can't blame me. Who would have thought that you wouldn't leave?" Su Qing ran off. It wasn't that he was afraid of Qing Lian, but the smell was simply too smelly. Even the old man subconsciously took 3 steps back. When Qing Lian saw their reactions, she became even angrier. She gritted her teeth and chased after Su Qing. After a long time, no one knew what Su Qing said, but Qing Lian let out a mournful cry and said, "Ren Baqian, I won't let you off." Naturally, Ren Baqian didn't know that he was being targeted. At this moment, he was looking at Zhang Junzheng with a kind face. "How is it? Is the name list ready?" "Sir Run, it's done." At this moment, Zhang Junzheng had a calm and smiling expression on his face. It seemed like he had thought things through. With both hands, he respectfully handed over a stack of paper that was filled with words. In fact, he had already thought it through. Since they wanted to take root in Dayo, it wouldn't be a bad thing for them to take advantage of Rinpochian. Since the Zhang family lost to Rinpochian in a few areas that they were extremely good at, then Rinpochian did indeed have some outstanding aspects. Furthermore, Rinpochian won these 3 competitions, causing a stir in the Zhang family. Many people quarreled endlessly over this matter. In particular, many of the old craftsmen in the Zhang family were in disbelief and wanted to see how good Rinpochian was. For these old craftsmen, a skill was more attractive than anything else, especially when it surpassed them in a few areas that the Zhang family was extremely good at. This made many of the old craftsmen want to see what kind of person Rinpochian was. Among them, even Zhang Junzheng had to address the person with the highest status as uncle. His status in the family was even higher than Zhang Junzheng's. It was precisely because of this that Zhang Junzheng was relieved and handed over the name list. As for how many of the names on the list represented in the Zhang family, only a few people in the Zhang family knew. Rinpochian took the paper and looked at it. He saw that it was densely packed with small words. At a glance, he could tell that there were quite a lot of them. "How many people are there?" Rinpochian raised his head and asked. "Sir Run, the Zhang family has a total of more than 5,900 people, and their names are all on this list." Zhang Junzheng cupped his fists. "How many craftsmen are there?" "There are more than 3,400 craftsmen and 2,000 people in other jobs." Not only that, but many of the elders in the family also have disciples who aren't related by blood. Although these disciples aren't on the list, they can also serve Dayo if the opportunity is right. The number of these disciples isn't less than the number of craftsmen, Zhang Junjing answered. Rinpoche looked down at the thick stack of paper in his hand again. There were 3,400 craftsmen, including those disciples. There were at least 7,000 to 8,000 people. For the impoverished Dayo, 7,000 to 8,000 craftsmen could be said to be a huge sum of money. If he had 7,000 to 8,000 skilled craftsmen under him, many things would be much easier to do. Sir, our Zhang family has a big business, and it won't be easy to leave the Yun nation, Zhang Junjing said again. Rinpoche nodded. After all, there were so many people, and many of them were famous craftsmen. It wouldn't be easy for all of them to run away at once. However, it didn't matter because the Yun nation wouldn't exist in the future. This was due to the lack of talents in Dayo, as well as the Aboriginals' lack of ambition and their habit of snatching without occupying. Up until now, they still hadn't realized that the Aboriginals weren't just going to snatch the Yun nation, but to swallow the entire Yun nation. What other requests do you have? Rinpoche asked after thinking for a while. I want you to give our Zhang family a future, Zhang Junki immediately said solemnly. This was the most important thing. Don't worry, Rinpoche said faintly. As long as your Zhang family does a good job, I can guarantee that you will have a place in the future. Thank you very much, sir. Zhang Junjing cupped his hands. Your Zhang family members don't have to withdraw and hurry. Those who are still in the cities that have been conquered can withdraw first. I will give you a token, and they can travel with it without any trouble. Protector Z from the Protectorate of the Northeast will also arrange for people to escort them. As for the rest, stay where you are and wait for my news, Rinpoche said. However, in the chaos of war, it's inevitable that there will be casualties. I will take care of this matter. You can rest assured. After sending Zhang Junjing off, Rinpoche called for Zhuolong and gave him the stack of papers. He asked Zhuolong to find someone to copy it, and then send someone to investigate. With the Jing tribe, it would be much easier to investigate in the Yun nation. Rinpoche then looked for the Empress and suggested that Zi Donglai send more prisoners of war back to open mines and repair roads. He had mentioned this before, but Zi Donglai wasn't in the mood to do so due to the urgency of the war at the front line. Now that Zi Donglai had conquered nearly 10 cities in the Yun nation, it was time to raise the issue. It was always right to build roads if one wanted to get rich. In addition, there were various materials from the Yun nation that Dayo lacked. This included, but wasn't limited to, various metals such as iron and aluminum. For this reason, Rinpoche proposed to mobilize militias from the various cities to the Yun nation and transport all kinds of looted materials back to replenish Dayo. After their discussion, the Empress held a meeting with the ministers the next day and gave Zi Donglai an order. Soon after, the Aboriginals' offensive at the front line began to change. In the past, they mainly killed, but later on, they started to leave some alive. Although they often couldn't hold back, and only a few people survived after a battle, this was a signal. At the same time, the various cities in Dayo began to transmit information. Batches of militias were issued with weapons, walked out of the cities, and gathered in the northeast. At this time, Rinpoche received an extremely incredible piece of news. The emperor of Great Xia, Xia Baichong, had actually died from the stench. The news was sent by Su Qing. After reading this secret letter, Rinpoche's expression suddenly became extremely strange. He then delivered this secret letter to the Empress, who was also dumbfounded after reading it. Rinpoche, on the other hand, carefully admired this rare expression of the Empress. Chapter 593. Sister, sister, the emperor is dead. In a Taoist temple, a 16 or 17-year-old Taoist nun jumped into the room and shouted. In the room, there was a woman dressed in Taoist robes. She looked like a fairy who had descended to the mortal world and was practicing calligraphy. Her gaze froze when she heard the shout. Such a big thing actually happened. The woman in the room muttered to herself and gently put the brush aside. Guess how he died? The young girl asked with a wink. Since you are asking this, Something must have happened. I can't guess. Tell me. The woman smiled, and the room suddenly became much warmer. You are so boring. The young girl pouted and then exclaimed in disbelief. He died from a stench. Stench. The woman in the room was shocked to hear this answer. Such a way of dying could be considered as shocking. Guess who did it? The young girl asked mischievously. I can't. The woman still smiled and shook her head. You have seen it before. The woman looked at her gently and didn't say a word. After a minute or two, the young girl couldn't hold on anymore and said dejectedly, Forget it. I will tell you. It was Qi Zixiao's gigolo. Ah. The woman opened her mouth slightly and revealed a surprised expression. Her thoughts immediately drifted to the man and woman she had met in the mountains last year, a little later than today. This woman was naturally Li Yuanzhu, and the young girl was Ning Qing. Ning Qing had grown taller over the past year, and the baby fat on her face had lessened. She looked much more mature than she was a year ago. I knew that guy wasn't a good person when I saw him last year, but I didn't expect him to do such an evil thing. I will teach him a lesson when I see him again. Ning Qing was furious at the thought of Rinpoche. She looked down and realized that her breasts had grown a lot over the past year. Li Yuanzhu couldn't help but laugh at her reaction. However, that man was really hard to evaluate. No one had ever spoken to her like that in her entire life. Rinpoche's words, her breasts are bigger than yours, left a deep impression on both of them. What exactly happened? Li Yuanzhu asked after some thought. I heard that the palace was suddenly covered with a stench, and the old emperor died from it. I wonder what kind of stench could kill the old emperor. Ning Qing asked curiously. Just as the empress had said, Rinpoche had indeed become famous. Moreover, it was a very famous one. That day, hundreds of stink bombs exploded within the imperial palace, virtually covering the entire imperial palace. The Xia emperor immediately passed out from suffocation. No one could live in the palace anymore. Almost all the concubines had moved out as if they were fleeing for their lives. Only a few eunuchs and guards were left in the palace. They felt like they were going to die at any moment. At the same time, they stuck to their posts, cleaning up the palace. It wasn't until 7 days later that the smell of the palace began to lessen. As for the Xia emperor, he had been in poor health for the past half year, and now that he had been tortured like this, he died within 2 days. Naturally, the morning letter that was sent out to the public could not say that Emperor Xia had died from the stench. If that was the case, everyone in the world would laugh their heads off. It could also not say that he had died from a serious illness, as such a major event in the royal palace could not be kept a secret. In the end, all the civil and military officials of the court came together and announced that Emperor Xia had been secretly poisoned to death. At the same time, Great Xia was also preparing to use this opportunity to divert the conflict within the country and divert the attention of the people to the murderer who poisoned Emperor Xia. They wanted to use this opportunity to win a breather. However, early the next morning, countless flyers were pasted all over the imperial capital. Rinpoche, the murderer. These words were naturally written by Su Qing. He pondered for a long time. Rinpoche, the one who released the poisonous gas bomb. Rinpoche, the one who killed Emperor Xia with the stench. No matter which one sounded awkward, and he was afraid that Rinpoche would find trouble with him. After experiencing this incident, he was afraid that Rinpoche would find an opportunity to take revenge on him. In the end, he simply used the words Rinpoche, the murderer. At first, the people of Great Xia were puzzled as to who Rinpoche was. Then, they remembered that Gigolo Qi Zixiao, who had poisoned tens of thousands of people to death. Coupled with the fact that the aboriginals had flaunted their prowess in Great Xia, the people were immediately agitated. In particular, with the secret efforts of some people, almost all of the people's spearheads were pointed at Dayo. One had to know that the emperor of Great Xia had actually been poisoned to death. How humiliating was this? If they didn't take revenge, what face would the imperial court have? This time, it was the imperial court's turn to feel numb. This was because they knew that this was really done by Rinpoche. Even if Rinpoche was in Dayo, And even if the Aboriginals didn't have the strength to send so many things into the palace of Great Xia. However, the cylinders that remained in the palace indicated the identity of the owner of this object. It had to be Rinpochian. Although this exquisite object was different from the small melons that could explode on the battlefield, it had the same style. However, what the imperial court of Great Xia wanted to do now was to recuperate and not roll up their sleeves and start a life-and-death battle with the Aboriginals. However, the current attitude of the people was also a form of pressure to them. At the same time, this incident had indeed enraged the imperial court. The attitude of the military generals was almost the same as that of the people. In addition, there was the crown prince of Great Xia. He still had a bunch of brothers who were eyeing him covetously. If the first thing he did after ascending to the throne wasn't to avenge Emperor Xia, the reaction of all parties could be imagined. Therefore, after a short period of chaos, for various reasons, Great Xia, whether they were willing or not, had a unified attitude. This revenge had to be taken. At the same time, the entire Great Xia began to move. Orders to recruit soldiers, increase taxes, and collect food were quickly passed down. At the same time, there were too many people who knew about this matter. After all, there were too many people in the palace and nearly 1 million people in the capital. The true cause of Emperor Xia's death was also spread in the ears of some people, especially those who were well-informed. Rinpochian also had a new nickname among some people. Stinky Emperor. On one hand, it was because Rinpochian had really killed an emperor with his stench. On the other hand, it was because of the power of the stench in the palace this time. Su Qing happily sent Rinpochian's new nickname to him in a secret letter. When Rinpochian received the letter, his face turned black. This wasn't even as good as the poison warrior from before. On the other hand, the Empress laughed heartily for a long time. This matter was really fun. In addition, the fact that Xia Baichong had died from the stench was also worthy of her happiness. She immediately sent an order to the court officials to hold a banquet in the palace that night to celebrate. Subsequently, the news that Xia Baichong had died from the stench spread along with the Empress's order. Many people laughed until their mouths twitched. The fact that the Emperor of Great Xia had died from the stench was simply the biggest joke in the world. Stinky Emperor, how exactly did you stink Xia Baichong to death? During the banquet, Tong Jingye came to Rinpochian's side with a face full of gossip. You want to know? Rinpochian's face turned black as he looked at him maliciously. I really want to know. Tong Jingye touched his beard, unable to suppress his exuberant curiosity. When Rinpochian saw that the others were also looking at him with a face full of gossip, he really had the urge to throw a skunk bomb at the banquet. However, after thinking about it, he would be beaten to death by the Empress. Then, he gloomily said, "Wait for me outside the city tomorrow. If anyone else wants to know, you can come along. I will show you." Tong Jingye looked at Rinpochian for a long time before saying, "You are trying to trick me." Rinpochian cursed in his heart. This old fox wasn't like an aboriginal at all. However, I still can't suppress my curiosity. Tomorrow, I will wait for you outside the city, Stinky Emperor. Tong Jingye hesitated for a while, but still said resolutely. You really want to know what kind of stench could kill Emperor Xia? Wasn't it just a stench? Could it even kill a cardinal heaven expert like him? Chapter 594. The next day after class, Rinpochian put 2 skunk bombs in his bag and rushed out of the city with his guards. When he arrived outside the city, he saw that there were quite a lot of people. Dozens of burly men with bald or braided hair and arms big enough to race horses stood there. Dayo's officials were really idle. Tong Jingye and Qin Chuan were staring at each other. They were surrounded by officials from the Ministry of Works and the Ministry of War, as well as 2 assistant ministers. They were all laughing and joking around. Not far away stood Minister Xianhua of the Ministry of Rights, Minister Yan of the Ministry of Justice, Minister Xiong Yaohe of the Ministry of Personnel, as well as officials from the Taichung Bureau, the Honglu Bureau, the Public Order Bureau, the Inspection Bureau, the Imperial Court, the Seal Bureau, the Meritorious Department, and the examination bureau. Other than the great elder, the junior elder, and the people from the Ministry of Revenue, almost everyone was present. Renbachien reckoned that if this skunk bomb was thrown, all the higher-ups of Dayo would be wiped out. He originally thought that Tong Jingye brought a few small fries with him, but he didn't expect so many people to come. It would be easier to understand if Qin Xuan was here. However, weren't the curiosity of the others a little too exuberant? It can only be said that the aboriginals didn't have a lot of people. Sir Ren is here. Feng Ho laughed when he saw Ren Bachien coming from afar and appeared in front of him in a few flashes. Why are there so many people? Ren Bachien felt a little dizzy. Think about it. If a skunk bomb wiped out all the higher-ups of Dayo, how would they look at him in the future? Sir Tong and Sir Qin are making a bet on who can withstand Sir Ren's stench. After the news spread, the other officials were also curious about how Sir Ren managed to stink Xia Baichong to death. Feng Ho grinned with a ferocious face. Ren Bachien pondered for a while and felt that there was something wrong with these words. What did he mean by my stench? He made it sound as if he smelled bad. He glanced at Feng Ho, then at the crowd, and asked, how did Minister Tong and Minister Qin make the bet? Whoever can't stand has to stay away from the other party for a month. Feng Ho said. Ren Bachian's face was full of vigor. These two were really brave warriors. If a person smelled this odor, they would definitely run away. But if the two of them were to make a bet, whoever ran away first would be the loser. The consequences would be too horrible to look at. Sir Ren, we have been waiting for a long time. Let me experience your stench. Tong Jingye turned his head and laughed at Ren Bachien. Principal Run, we have been waiting for a long time. Everyone cupped their hands. I've finally grasped this opportunity today. In the future, old man, when you see me, you'll have to stay far away from me. Qin Chuan sneered. Who are you calling, old man? Tong Jingye turned his head and asked Qin Chuan in disdain. The old man is calling you. Qin Chuan was the kind of person who had fallen into the same pit countless times. Ren Bachien smiled and returned the salute as he walked into the crowd. He took out 2 skunk bombs from the back of his waist and gestured, pull these open and throw them at your feet. It won't explode, right? Tong Jingye asked suspiciously. Whenever he saw this thing, he felt like it was going to explode. This is not a bomb. How is that possible? Besides, even if it explodes, it won't be a big deal to all of you. As he spoke, he handed the things to the 2 of them, one in each hand. He cupped his hands and said, Everyone, please carry on with your work. I still have to go back and see Her Majesty. After he finished speaking, he turned and ran away as if he was being chased by a dog. He was afraid that someone might throw him at the spot where the skunk bomb was to get back at him. He didn't want to experience the smell a second time after smelling it once. So it's like this. Pull this away, right? Tong Jingye fiddled with the skunk bomb, pulled the ring off, and threw it at his feet. Qin Chuan did the same, and the 2 of them stared at each other. In less than 5 seconds, an extremely strong and suffocating smell pervaded the air. The surrounding people immediately burst into an uproar and ran away. It was as if a bomb had exploded, and dozens of people immediately ran in all directions. They vomited as they ran, and their faces looked as if they had eaten feces. Sure enough, a stench that could kill Xia Baichong wasn't easy to deal with. Only Qin Chuan and Tong Jingye were left standing there with their faces turning green. They stared at each other, smelled the suffocating stench, and felt as if countless sledgehammers were hitting their heads. They were seeing stars, and they couldn't help but feel snot and tears flowing down their cheeks. Sure enough, it's a stench that could kill Xia Baichong. Ugh. Tong Jingye's face looked as if his crotch had been kicked dozens of times. His face turned green for a while, but he had to hold on and not run. Just now, he almost ran away, but when he subconsciously took a step, he remembered the bet and froze in place. Losing wasn't scary, but losing to an old enemy in front of him was unacceptable. You can't hold on anymore, right? If you can't hold on, get lost. Ugh, just stay away from me in the future. Qin Chuan's face was similar to Tong Jingye's as he gritted his teeth and held on. I'm fine, but you are an old bag of bones. If you can't hold on, don't force yourself and end up like Xia Baichong. Tong Jinye's eyes were wide open as he squeezed his words out from the gaps between his teeth. Sir Ren's stench is extraordinary. If you can't hold on, just ask for mercy. I don't need you to stay away from me. Qin Chuan stared at Tong Jinye with his eyes wide open. Haha, old man. How can I, Tong Jinye, stand this little stench? If you can't hold on, just leave and I'll let you go. I don't need you to stay away from me. Tong Jinye wanted to let out a heroic laugh, but he almost vomited the moment he opened his mouth. In the end, he could only force out a dry smile. Seeing that they couldn't convince each other, the two of them stared at each other while enduring the stench that was beyond their limits. Old bastard, you actually want to drag me with you even if you die. I definitely won't let you off, Tong Jinye cursed in his heart. He felt that his tears were about to flow out. Old man, you're actually still holding on. I don't believe that you can hold on. Qin Chuan thought to himself. The two of them stared at each other with their eyes wide open. The two iron cylinders under their feet were still emitting that stench, making the surrounding stench even more intense. Ha ha! Do you dare to take a deep breath? Tong Jinye suddenly realized that Qin Chuan's chest wasn't moving at all and immediately laughed out loud. Why wouldn't I dare? Qin Chuan said as he took a deep breath. His stomach churned, and he almost vomited his breakfast. However, he forcefully swallowed it back down. The taste of stomach acid was still coming out from the gaps between his teeth. He said in a sinister tone, Old man, do you dare to take a deep breath? The others had already escaped far away. However, even though they were far away, they could still smell the stench on their bodies. It was as if the stench was like maggots in one's bones. They turned their heads to look at Qin Chuan and Tong Jinye, who were still standing in their original spots. They couldn't help but admire them. These two sirs are extraordinary. After saying this, they ran back home to take a shower. Ren Baqian ran all the way back to the top of the city wall and looked into the distance. He saw that the two figures were still standing there motionlessly. Ren Baqian admired them and said, These two are really brave warriors. Bathing in the so-called hot feces pit wasn't necessarily comparable to the courage of these two people outside the city. At least, he couldn't do it. However, he didn't know how long it would take for the stench to wash off their bodies if they just stood there like that. It was better to quickly inform the Empress and give them a day off. Chapter 595. The Empress ordered Tong Jinye and Qin Chuan not to attend morning court for 10 days after they heard each other. It was said that the two of them shut themselves in the residence after returning. There was no other way. No matter where they went, there was a fragrant wind. On the way back, the commoners looked at them as if they had seen ghosts. Wherever the two of them appeared, people would scatter. For the next few days, the two residences would occasionally be heard shouting, Tong Jinye, you old man, I'll definitely teach you a lesson. Or, Qin Chuan, you old man, I'll definitely teach you a lesson. Although the two of them shut themselves in the residence, they would occasionally walk around the residence. The end result was that the entire Qin residence and the Tong residence were filled with the smell. For the next period of time, Tong Lan would grind her canine teeth every time she saw Ren Baqian at school and wanted to bite him. Finally, one day, Ren Baqian appeared at the training ground in the palace with a sullen face. The Empress had already strictly ordered him to practice martial arts diligently. The reason was that Great Xia would definitely send people to assassinate him, just like the previous few times since he had poisoned them. Although there were very few foreigners in Lan City, there were still some shopkeepers from the big clans who were on standby. With the addition of a Jing tribe, there was still a possibility of Great Xia people sneaking in. Ren Baqian looked at Tong Lan with an embarrassed look on his face. He felt that the Empress's words just now were all nonsense. No matter how much he practiced, it would be useless if he encountered a spirit wheel expert. He could only rely on his bodyguards to buy time and escape back to Earth. If he encountered an expert below the spirit wheel level, he wouldn't be able to get past his bodyguards. However, the Empress was the most powerful person in the world. In the end, he still stood here. On the other hand, the little Lolita was excited. The Tong residents have been tossed around miserably these days, and now she could finally take revenge. Yagawei, you said it yourself. You are the teacher at the school, so beating you up during practice isn't considered deceiving your teacher, the little Lolita said seriously as she clenched her fists. Rinpoche was flabbergasted and asked, "How is that possible? Your teacher will always be your teacher, and your grandfather will always be your grandfather. If you beat me up, you will be deceiving your teacher. I will look for your grandfather and have a good chat with him later. He's at home. Go and look for him." Tong Lan sneered and then looked at the Empress. Don't worry about his identity. At the side, the Empress was wearing sunglasses and lying on a recliner. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan were holding a huge imperial canopy for her to use as a parasol. There were fruits and wine on the small round table beside her. If she were to change into a bikini, she would look like she was basking in the sun. Upon hearing the Empress's order, Tong Lan grinned at him, revealing her two small canine teeth. In a flash, she appeared above his head and rained down a pair of small fists. Rinpoche narrowed his eyes and retreated a few meters. Could this stance be the legendary long-lost Pegasus Meteor Fist? I didn't expect this move to be used by your Tong clan. Tong Lan's imposing manner was suddenly stifled. She somersaulted in the air and landed on the ground. What is the Pegasus Meteor Fist? Then, Rinpoche's vision darkened. He took large strides forward and executed the extremely vicious move of the Fist of Death, the Heart-Killing Blade. Using one hand as a blade, he channeled all his strength into his arm and stabbed it toward Tong Lan. At this moment, when Rinpoche executed the heart-killing blade, the muscles on his arm bulged. His veins were like dragons winding around his arm. When he struck with his hand, there was a strong, piercing sound as if the air was being sliced apart. The Empress nodded her head slightly. This move of Rinpoche's was somewhat skillful, but it was still too inexperienced and not fast enough. Tong Lan leaped up slightly and stepped on Rinpoche's arm. Rinpoche felt a strong force pressing down on his arm. A gust of wind assaulted his face as Tong Lan kicked him. The next move of the heart-killing blade was either the ripper hand or the throat-ripping hand. After all, the Fist of Death was a fist technique used to kill enemies in the army. With Tong Lan's foot on Rinpoche's arm, he couldn't execute any of the moves he wanted to execute. If it was in the past, this kick from Tong Lan would basically end the battle. After all, regardless of strength or speed, Tong Lan had the absolute advantage. Unexpectedly, it was as if Rinpoche had already guessed this move. He immediately lay down, supported himself with both hands on the ground, and unexpectedly twisted his body. His waist was twisted at a 90-degree angle, and both his legs were wrapped around Tong Lan's waist. It would have been fine if a woman used this move, but Rinpoche's current body weight was 120 kilograms. It was considered difficult for him to execute this move. This move was the simplest form of the hunter technique that the Empress had taught him, the ground entanglement. It was used when he learned the entanglement of pythons to wrap around a person's waist, neck, or jaw. However, he executed this move at this moment. Even though Tong Lan was a little surprised, she still twisted her body in midair. Her body was almost touching Rinpoche's legs as she twisted her body. Then, she grabbed both of his legs with each hand and threw him out, creating a human-sized pit on the ground. Rinpoche was dizzy from the fall. He stood up and shook his head. Then, he looked at Tong Lan with a dazed expression and said, "Your pants fell off. Do you think I will believe you? This move is outdated." Tong Lan wrinkled her nose and snorted. Then, she felt a chill on both her legs. Rinpoche looked on helplessly as Tong Lan's pants fell off, revealing a small pair of flat pants. It was the kind that Lin Chaola always wore and had a similar function as safety pants. After all, when the women in this world fought with others, they would raise their legs a lot and even jump to high places. If they didn't wear it like in ancient China, they would have long been exposed. Rinpoche subconsciously turned his head and looked at the Empress. He saw her holding a wine glass in one hand and looking at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. Rinpoche's face also turned red. After all, it wasn't very honorable to use this move on a 10-year-old Lolita. I will fight it out with you. Tong Lan screamed as if she was being molested. Her face was as red as blood. An hour later, Tong Lan left in a huff. Rinpoche's eye sockets were like those of a panda. Even though he still had panda eyes, there was still a huge improvement this time. At least, all right, even though he didn't injure Tong Lan, he had injured her belt. Even if she was careless, this was still a huge improvement. Your ground entanglement is pretty good. How about the other moves? The Empress laughed. I still can't do it all. Many of the moves simply challenge the limits of humans. Rinpoche was also helpless. There were a total of 13 moves in the hunter technique, and he could only use 2 of them. There were still 5 moves that he could barely perform, and he couldn't even perform the rest of the moves. This set of moves is only effective on humans. However, you aren't in the mountains now, and you don't have to face ferocious beasts. If you master this set of hunter technique, you will more or less have the ability to protect yourself, the Empress said faintly. The next day, when Rinpoche went to class, Tong Lan saw that he was still panting with anger. Even though she was only a 10-year-old girl, the extraordinary humiliation of her pants falling off was enough for her to remember for the rest of her life. Moreover, she was wearing a pair of striped underpants, and it was actually seen by others. This was simply a lifetime of humiliation. Rinpoche didn't really care. In any case, Tong Lan was panting with anger most of the time. After half a month, this group of students had made some progress with their steam train. At the very least, they had changed the single flywheel at the front into 2 large double flywheels. At the back, there was a row of wheels that gradually became smaller. The outside was wrapped with animal tendons, and all the wheels were connected together. It was just like the tracks of a tank. At the same time, the connecting rods were all changed to the inside of the train. This was because they had consulted a few carpenters to make such rapid progress. However, they were merely consulting, and Rinpoche had personally seen them make these things. Therefore, Rinpoche didn't mind. After all, he couldn't ask this group of students to understand blacksmithing and carpentry. Even though there were pointers from the carpenters, most of it was their own effort. Chapter 596. In the following days, Rinpoche students were stuck in a situation where the locomotive was too heavy and the steam engine couldn't move it. Furthermore, the steam engine was too big and the structure couldn't support it. Between these 2 situations, the size of the locomotive started to increase. Half a month later, seeing that the locomotive was half the size of courtyard, Rinpoche finally couldn't help but ask, "Can't you bunch of idiots change the structure to iron? Iron is too expensive. We can't afford it." Tong Lan raised her small face and said confidently. Everyone nodded their heads. Rinpoche was so angry that he almost laughed. A bunch of officials' children. Well, even though they were good-for-nothings among the officials' children, they still had a lot of pocket money, right? With so many people pooling together, they shouldn't be unable to afford iron, right? However, their expressions didn't seem to be fake. Rinpoche recalled that he hadn't been paying much attention to the current situation of Daeyo's iron production, so he didn't say anything more. However, he had recently discovered some interesting phenomena. In the past, it was fine, but ever since the steam engine was made, these students gradually divided into 3 levels. The first level consisted of Tong Lan and Shurgan, who were the strongest. At this moment, it could be seen from their bodies that the rest of the students were more or less dirty, but they were relatively clean. However, the cleanliness of the 2 of them was different. Tong Lan's entire body was clean and refreshing. She was dressed in white, which was completely out of place in the messy surroundings. As for Shurgan, even though his chest and sleeves looked a little dirty, one could tell from his hands that they were clean without any traces of work. However, he made his clothes a little dirty so that he didn't look so special. It could only be said that he was indeed the son of the Great Elder. He was on a completely different level from Tong Lan, who was a silly girl with a brain full of muscles. These two people were mainly responsible for talking and giving advice. Among them, Shirgan had put forward many useful suggestions. As for Tong Lan, she was only used as a talker and a mascot. Even though Tong Lan seemed to have done a lot of things recently, these were all because of differences in ideology, such as fighting with Shirgan and coming up with bad ideas. The second level consisted of a small number of people who were stronger, did less work, and mainly did odd jobs, and came up with ideas. Unexpectedly, this group of people was made up of commoner students. These people were relatively hardworking, and their individual strengths were pretty good. After entering Runbachian school by chance, their performance was generally pretty good. The last group was led by Du Laolu and the rest, who were good-for-nothings from the various clans. All of them were dirty and had been reduced to coolies. The Aboriginals' respect for martial prowess and the law of the jungle was clearly displayed here. However, Rinpochian felt that this kind of division wasn't too bad. At the very least, it was much better than having the coolies be the children of commoners. The ethos of Deo was still relatively simple. After class, he went to the Ministry of Works to ask about it. After asking around, he found out that the students really couldn't afford it. It wasn't fake, it was real. Even though the mining of the Demo iron mine in Deo had been going very smoothly for the past 6 months, causing Deo's iron production to soar, the price of the iron mine hadn't dropped by much. Deo's demand for iron was simply too high. Even though Mount Demo had produced quite a lot of iron ore, it still had to satisfy the needs of the army. During the war, the consumption of weapons had always been very fast. Moreover, the militia also needed a large amount of weapons. After removing these two items, there weren't that many weapons that ended up in the hands of the commoners. After all, the Mount Demo iron mine had only been mining with the solar furnace for slightly more than half a year. At the very most, there were only 500,000 kilograms of iron, and only about 50,000 weapons were forged. Even though it was already 100 times faster than before, the time was still too short. Nowadays, there were more weapons among the commoners than before, but most of them were concentrated in the north. They were mainly made from the weapons left behind by Great Xia. As a result, the price of iron was still very high and only slightly lower than before. It was fine to let these students pool their money to buy 1 or 2 weapons, but they didn't have to think about the rest. 1 kilogram of iron cost about 4 taels of silver. Including the various structures, connecting rods, and wheels of the steam engine, they would need at least 500 kilograms of iron, which was 4,000 taels of silver. The monthly salary of a low-level official was only 6 taels of silver. Even though most of these students came from good backgrounds, firstly, Aboriginal officials weren't very wealthy. Secondly, most of these students were good-for-nothings who weren't very well received by their clans, so they didn't have much money. As a result, they really couldn't afford 4,000 taels of silver. Upon seeing this, Rinpochian returned to the palace and found the Empress. He specially transferred 1,500 kilograms of iron to the Black Bamboo Academy and ordered the Ministry of Works to transfer a few blacksmiths over. They partitioned a courtyard in a corner of the academy. Every day after school, they would hammer there, and finally, the production of the locomotive was back on track. In fact, as long as the power problem was solved and there was a clear goal, it wasn't too difficult to complete. It was just a matter of time before a suitable structure could be developed. Only then would they be able to manufacture this horribly ugly locomotive with a hair-raising conversion rate. Even though Rinpochian had a complete train drawing from the early 20th century in his hand, he didn't intend to take it out. He left it to the students to improve bit by bit, and the value of the harvest was much higher than that of a train. Rinpochian had been quietly observing their changes and waiting for the day they would transform. Rinpochian's daily life had also become one of the 2 places he had been looking forward to, the palace and the academy. Other than attending classes every day, he would cultivate in the palace. Every now and then, he would be taught a lesson by the little Lolita. At other times, he would accompany the Empress to sit in the palace in a daze or walk around the palace to observe the subtle changes. For example, the street lamps that could be seen everywhere. After returning to Lan City for a few months, Rinpoche began to carry out his palace illumination project. When he had nothing to do, he would bring back some street lamp equipment and batteries. After a few months, there was now a street lamp every 20 meters in the palace. This allowed the palace to be brightly lit throughout the night, as if it was a city that never slept. The Empress was extremely happy with such a change. When she had nothing to do, she would sit on the roof of the palace chamber and drink wine at night. As far as her eyes could see, she would see the bright palace. At the same time, such a change made the imperial guards and maids in the palace a little uncomfortable. They didn't use torches or palace lanterns at night anymore. It was as if the palace had suddenly become a city that never slept in a few months. Regardless of whether it was day or night, there wasn't a single place that was dark. Even in other parts of Lan City, one could see the exceptionally bright palace every night. The biggest impact this had on them was that they couldn't find a place to pee anywhere they wanted. It was too bright. After all, in a brightly lit place, under the watchful eyes of everyone, it took courage to pee anywhere they wanted. Similarly, the officials in the imperial court were amazed by the huge changes in the palace. At the very beginning, they had discovered the street lamps in the palace. After all, there were so many pillars on both sides of the road that it was impossible to not see them. However, there were only a few of them at that time. Coupled with the subsequent war with Great Xia and the pacification of Tianjin Basin, Rinpoche and the Empress weren't in the palace, leaving them in Lan City to speculate. However, no matter how they speculated, there was one thing that everyone was sure of. This kind of treasure that absorbed light during the day and released at night was definitely very valuable. They didn't expect that within a few months of the Empress and Rinpoche's return, the palace would be covered with such treasures, leaving no blind spots in the palace. Although it was extremely beautiful, it also made many people even more shocked. How much did it cost to build so many treasures, and where did they come from? In addition, there were still battles going on in the northeast and southeast. The sudden change in the palace caused a lot of criticism. In fact, this wasn't the only change. Many of the windows in the palace were also replaced with glass. However, everyone knew that the glass was made by the imperial family. Although it was expensive, it didn't cause much discussion. On the contrary, these street lamps were more precious treasures than the luminous pearls in the eyes of many people. After all, how bright were the luminous pearls? How could they compare to these street lamps in the palace? This caused many officials to privately discuss that the Empress had changed and had become too extravagant. Chapter 597. Those guys were talking about the street lamps in the palace again today. The Empress said unhappily as she sat at the table. On the table between the Empress and Rinpoche, there was a steaming hot pot exuding an alluring aroma. Not far from them, there was an ice basin and a fan blowing cool air at them. "Your Majesty, did you lose your temper again?" Rinpoche filled the Empress's glass with wine and asked with a smile. The Empress snorted. In any case, the Dayo court was full of tough people, and it wasn't a big deal for them to be kicked and slapped twice. I explained it earlier, but they didn't understand and always thought that I was too extravagant. Furthermore, they have no right to question my actions, the Empress said unhappily after drinking a glass of wine. In fact, the last sentence was what the Empress wanted to say. If it were someone else, a few more explanations would clear up everyone's doubts. However, with the Empress's temperament, how could she explain so much calmly? The officials of Dayo found it hard to understand that these street lamps weren't worth much. In fact, street lamps could be considered treasures in this world. After all, they didn't have soot and smoke, and they were always bright and never extinguished. If they were sold outside, a lot of people would rush to buy them. Dayo wasn't a wealthy country, and the treasury of the palace depended entirely on Dayo's share of the gold mines to maintain the royal family's expenses. Everyone was used to this. Now that the palace had suddenly become like this, many people felt that something was wrong. However, the Empress was arrogant and only said a few words. Even if others asked, she was too lazy to explain, which caused many people to misunderstand. Perhaps I should explain to them, Rinpoche said after thinking for a while. In fact, he had heard about this before, but the Empress didn't say anything and no one asked him. He couldn't possibly go out and explain that these street lamps weren't worth much. You don't have to worry about this, the Empress said coldly. Pour me a glass of wine. Rinpoche filled the Empress's glass with wine and toasted her from afar. After drinking the wine, he changed the topic and asked, how are things in the northeast and southeast? There are 573 cities of different sizes in the Yun Nation, and Zedong has conquered 33 cities near the border. As for the southeast, it's still small and there aren't many movements. At this point, the Empress regained some energy. Conquering a city was a big deal for any emperor. This was true even for the Empress. Are there enough troops at the front line? Rinpoche asked. Originally, the Protectorate of the Northeast only had 15,000 soldiers. Another 40,000 new soldiers were sent over, bringing the total to 55,000. Before the war, with Great Xia, the Aboriginals had less than 100,000 soldiers. 55,000 was already half of the original amount. The Empress pondered for a while and said, I have already prepared to recruit 40,000 new soldiers. After the new year, I will pass down the conscription order. The food problem has been solved. Those sweet potatoes, pumpkins, and potatoes of yours have played a big role. Under Gui Home's promotion, the output is quite good. Next year, I plan to promote them on a larger scale. In addition, your canned food factory now provides rations for about 10,000 soldiers. It's just that many people are scolding you. The Empress pursed her lips and smiled when she mentioned this matter. Rinpoche was the scapegoat for this matter. This subject is ashamed to receive this scolding. We can exchange the canned food for livestock in the various cities and send it to the army. Rinpoche laughed. It was already good enough that they weren't hungry, yet they were still picky. There's no need to do this for the time being. It can only provide rations for 10,000 soldiers, mainly because the transportation distance is too long. After recruiting new soldiers next year, we can use canned food, sweet potatoes, pumpkins, and potatoes as rations for the new soldiers. This way, we won't have to transport them to the Yun Nation, the Empress said casually. Rinpoche thought about it and reckoned that he still had to bear this scolding. The two of them drank 4 bottles of sorghum wine and were slightly tipsy. Your wine tastes better. I wonder if there's any more? The Empress asked with her beautiful eyes. I have already told the Zhang family that this kind of wine has to be brewed for 10 years before being highly purified. The Zhang family still has a batch in the Yun Nation, but they can't ship it over now. We have to wait for Protector Z to conquer more than half of the Yun Nation. As Rinpoche spoke, he saw the Empress stand up and walk out. After the two of them left the hall, the Empress pulled Rinpoche and leaped onto the roof. Looking around, the entire palace was brightly lit. The Empress sat on the roof, supported her chin with her hand, and said happily, I like this palace very much. Then, she changed the topic and said, It's just that those people are too annoying. Rinpoche smiled bitterly. The Empress had changed her mind again. She disliked them for being long-winded and annoying, but she wasn't willing to explain in detail to them. He reached out to grab the Empress's hand and caressed it. The Empress's palm still gave off a delicate, soft, and warm feeling. What do you imagine Dayo to be like? The Empress allowed him to grab her arm, looked ahead, and suddenly fell into deep thought. In fact, the two of them had discussed this question many times, but required too much time to realize. Therefore, from time to time, she would use this method to imagine it, just like a girl who loved to fantasize. Standing together with your majesty is the world that I want, Rinpoche said softly. The Empress tilted her head and looked at him. Then, she turned her head and said, What a slippery answer. What I want to know is what the future Dayo should be like in your mind. Flying cars are everywhere. Robots do most of the work. After entering communism, The commoners have nothing to do and look at this and that on the streets every day for fun. Then the two of them looked at each other, and one of them said, "What are you looking at?" The other one said, "What's wrong with looking at you?" Then the two of them punched and kicked each other. Finally, it turned into a street brawl. After that, both of them were arrested and sent to the Public Order Bureau to be whipped. After Rinpoche finished speaking, he was kicked down by the Empress. This fellow's words were really too much of a wet blanket. Rinpoche got up from the ground, jumped to the top of the wall at the side, and then jumped to the main hall and sat beside the Empress. Seeing that the Empress was about to kick him, he quickly waved his hand and said, "Although I said it for fun, it's not completely fake. This kind of thing will happen when the speed of spiritual progress is far behind the speed of material progress. However, I'm afraid that I won't be able to see this scene, but your Majesty might be able to." Even if Rinpoche and the Empress were at the same level, his lifespan would be much shorter than hers. Furthermore, Rinpoche had to travel between two worlds and consume a lot of his lifespan on Earth. "I won't let you die too early. However, you only move once I whip you. Tomorrow, I will prepare a whip for you. If you don't practice diligently, I will whip you." The Empress tilted her head and looked at him. Her tone was full of eagerness to try. Chapter 598. It was already the middle of December in this world, but the sun was still high up in the sky, like a furnace. For seasons of hot weather, no, 2 seasons a year, one rainy season and the other dry season. Even though it was the rainy season, the weather was still stuffy. As for the dry season, it made people sweat profusely outside. Ah, ah, ah. A man's groaning voice came from the training ground in the palace. At this moment, Rinpoche was doing a split on the hot flagstone. Then he bent his legs toward his neck with all his might. He felt pain in his legs, as if they were about to be torn apart. Another feeling he had was the pain in his balls. It was really the pain in his balls. His balls were pressed tightly against the hot flagstone, and Rinpoche inexplicably thought of the legendary fried eggs on a flagstone. For a man who was 175 meters tall and weighed 220 kilograms to do such a thing, what kind of F***K was this? Your body is too stiff. Hold on for another 5 minutes. Doing this every day will soften your body, and you'll be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort when you practice the hunter technique. The Empress was sitting in a chair with a whip in one hand and a wine glass in the other. Behind her were the two maids, Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan, who were smiling like flowers. Rinpoche looked like he was about to cry. Who did he offend? He just said a few words on the roof of the palace hall, and the next day, the Empress actually did as she said and switched to using a whip. Every time he wanted to put his leg down, the Empress's whip would make a whistling sound and hit the stone slab beside him. The entire stone slab would crack. One had to know that this was a stone slab that was 2 inches thick. "Your Majesty, it's almost cooked." Rinpoche felt wronged. "Pass down the order to apply the purple grass ointment on him before training tomorrow," the Empress said to Hong Yuan. "Yes, Your Majesty." Hong Yuan pursed her lips and smiled. "Forget it, I can still hold on for a while." Rinpoche's facial expression suddenly changed. Purple grass ointment was roughly equivalent to essential balm in this world, but it had some other effects. However, Rinpoche absolutely didn't want to experience applying essential balm to his balls a second time. After persevering for 5 minutes with great difficulty, Rinpoche nimbly jumped up, ran to the chair beside the Empress, and lay down. Then he gulped down a big mouthful of ice fruit juice and finally felt alive. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan used the canopy to shield him from the shadows. "I thought I almost died." Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief. "It's not that I want to watch over you, but you are too lazy," the Empress said helplessly. Rinpoche was good in other aspects, but he was too lazy when it came to practicing martial arts. It was better to cultivate the Rui visualization. After all, this was the foundation. As for the other martial arts, He didn't care about them at all. For a whole year, the only thing he could use was probably the Fist of Death. Rinpoche's progress in the hunter art, which was highly valued by the Empress, had always been slow. When Rinpoche practiced it himself, he would immediately give up when the pain level reached a certain level. As a result, the Empress had no choice but to keep an eye on him. She even resorted to using her whip. However, the Empress felt that using a whip was rather fun. But I see that Her Majesty is quite happy when she wields the whip. Rinpoche looked resentful. Qin Yuan pursed her lips and smiled. Sir Ren's treatment is unique, and Her Majesty doesn't care about others so much. Rinpoche sighed faintly. This was life. The hardest thing to bear was the kindness of a beauty. Wasn't that right? However, it was especially hard to bear the kindness of a beauty like the Empress. During dinner with the Empress, Rinpoche said, "Your Majesty, do you want to experience the atmosphere of New Year on Earth? It's completely different from Dayo. There are no walls full of skeletons, and the atmosphere is much more normal." The Empress muttered, "Has Luoshan finished? It should be the last 2 episodes." Rinpoche's face immediately turned black. "Your Majesty, are you still thinking about watching the show?" "Let's go then," the Empress said after some thought. Otherwise, she would have to wait for Rinpoche to download it and bring it back. Rinpoche opened his mouth. Where did that cold and aloof Empress go? Why did she become a drama-crazed demon? "Your Majesty, you have to go back to my house for New Year's and see my parents." Rinpoche gave her a heads-up to avoid any unpredictable situations. "I saw them last time. Although they are quiet, they are quite kind," the Empress said after some thought. She still remembered Rinpoche's parents. "That's because they are quiet in front of you. They are usually very mischievous, especially my father." Rinpoche thought about this sentence, but didn't say it out loud. It was good that the Empress didn't react. This year, he could bring the Empress back to celebrate the new year with him. It wasn't bad as long as his parents didn't dare to take a deep breath like last time. The 2 of them returned to Earth in Rinpoche's room. As the house became more and more crowded, he changed from the living room to his bedroom every time. The 2 of them only saw the surrounding air distort and the environment change. Then, there was a clamor from downstairs, which sounded like a market. They could also vaguely hear voices like 4-2s and Little One. Both of them changed their clothes, and the Empress immediately transformed from a monarch into a city beauty. She wore a long red dress. All right, it had always been red. Then, she wore a pair of flat-soled cloth shoes. The old Beijing cloth shoes were worn by the Empress and gave off the vibe of a top international luxury brand. Her hair casually scattered down her back like a waterfall. "Hello, boss, lady boss." The children left on Earth in the mountains were no longer 6 muscular men, but 16. Seeing the 2 of them coming down from upstairs, the sofa and other things immediately clattered. Wine bottles fell all over the floor, and 2 decks of poker cards were scattered. Imagine the scene of 16 burly men who weighed 150 kilograms drinking. The petite Ding Jie was like a bean sprout sandwiched among them. His face was painted with the word tortoise, and he looked aggrieved as he shouted, "Boss, lady boss." All 16 of them had clean faces. Only Ding Jie's face was covered in scars. He was almost unrecognizable. Rinpoche wondered if they were playing a game where whoever won could paint a tortoise on his face. Rinpoche couldn't bear to ask why only Ding Jie's face was painted with tortoise. He couldn't bear to ask if he should give Ding Jie a raise. However, after thinking about how Ding Jie seemed to have followed and called her lady boss, he decided to forget about the raise. "It's the new year the day after tomorrow. Aren't you going back?" Rinpoche looked at Ding Jie and asked. "My flight is tomorrow morning," Ding Jie immediately replied. Rinpoche nodded, then called Shun Feng to book 2 round-trip tickets for him. After the call, the 12 winged cavalry warriors cleaned up the area around the sofa. Rinpoche lazily sat on the sofa and said, "You can't just eat, sleep, and beat Dowdu here every day. You have to do something." "Lady boss, who is Dowdu?" the 16 winged cavalry warriors asked curiously. "I'm Dowdu." Ding Jie said indignantly with a tortoise face. When he thought about this, he felt like a resentful wife. This was simply a tragedy. What happened to the poor mountain children? How did it turn out like this? Cough, cough. Ren Bachien coughed. I originally wanted to set up a security company, but after thinking about it, I decided to build a few martial arts centers. It's more suitable for all of you. Ren Bachien's original goal wasn't to bring more than a dozen winged cavalry warriors to guard the door, but to establish his own power to prevent himself from being restricted. Currently, the winged cavalry warriors had stayed here for more than a year and had a basic understanding of the situation on Earth. It was time to let them out. Where's Luoshin? Help me find it. The Empress poked Renbachien. Half of Renbachien's body immediately went numb. Renbachien found Luoshin for the Empress and then continued to say to everyone with a calm face, "You probably have an idea. Dingjia, when the time comes, you won't have to stay idle. I will make arrangements for you. Why can I only watch it for 6 minutes?" The Empress poked Renbachien again. Half of Renbachien's body went numb again. He glanced at the Empress with a hidden bitterness, took the phone, looked at it, and said, "The membership period has expired. I will charge it now." After he was done, Renbachien looked up at everyone in front of him, opened his mouth, and suddenly forgot what he wanted to say. Chapter 599. Early the next morning, Renbachien and the Empress went downstairs and saw the 16 winged cavalry warriors standing there in an orderly manner with looks of anticipation on their faces. Shi Yang and Galu, in particular, were just short of shouting, "It's me, it's me, it's me." Renbachien's face was bright and full of expression. Last year, he had brought Shi Yang and Galu home as guards to celebrate the new year. In the end, the two of them staged a victorious escape. They caused trouble along the way and even ran to San Fatso's place. This year, San Fatso had even invited the two of them for a vacation several times. All through the government, and young Senator Renbachien didn't know how the two of them had moved the post-80s generation, who was regarded as the strongest in the world and resisted the pressure from the whole world. Xiangbing, Su Wei, you too. The rest of you stay here obediently. I'll get someone to send wine and meat over. Renbachien glanced at the winged cavalry warriors and picked two of them who had arrived first to be his guards. The two of them were immediately overjoyed. They had been listening to them boast about their experiences in the outside world every day for the past year, which made the others very envious. After the four of them went out, Renbachien occasionally turned to look at the Empress as he drove. "What are you looking at? If you continue to look, I will gouge out your eyeballs." The Empress said coldly, feeling uncomfortable under his gaze. Renbachien smiled and said, "It's rare to see your Majesty put on makeup and dress up. You look even more beautiful." Today, the Empress was wearing a red dress with a black coat. She actually applied a layer of lipstick today, which was very rare. Even though she didn't put on any other makeup, her fiery red lips made her look even more gorgeous. The two people in the back seat didn't dare to reply and completely pretended not to hear anything. The Empress snorted softly and turned to look out of the window. Even though she had never celebrated the new year in this world, she had seen it in many TV dramas. At least she knew that it was quite important, especially when the whole city would be filled with fireworks during the new year, which made her look forward to it very much. "Hey, Steel Centipede!" The Empress suddenly called out. Renbachien turned to look and saw a mother and son by the roadside. The child was only 5 or 6 years old, and the mother was in her early 30s. There was also a mechanical dog crawling under their feet. The steel centipede that the Empress was referring to was the mechanical dog. The Empress's first mechanical dog was destroyed by Qingping. Renbachien made a few more for the Empress. She named them Steel Centipede, Steel Tooth, Steel Bone, Steel Bar, Steel Skin, and Steel Claw. She liked them for a period of time. However, recently, the Empress rarely charged them. She didn't expect to see someone else's robot dog here and was reminded of it. In fact, when the Empress saw that mechanical dog, She was reminded of the days when she liked those little things. She was a little sentimental. After all, those mechanical dogs were still a very happy memory in her mind, and there weren't many such things in her memory. It was already February 11th, 2021. Another year had passed in a flash. Although Shanghai had not changed much, there were still some differences. Rinpoche had seen advertisements for self-driving cars many times. In fact, he had seen quite a few of them along the way. This made him decide to buy one to free his hands. In this way, he could even give up the idea of letting those idiots get a driver's license. He believed that those idiots would definitely drive a car like a tank. In addition, there were many self-driving banks and supermarkets that had only been tried out a few years ago. Occasionally, they could be seen on certain street corners. Advertisements for homeschooling robots were everywhere and could often be seen on self-driving buses. Even small hospitals that mainly used medical robots had begun to appear. It was said that ordinary diseases could be diagnosed, prescribed, and even given intravenous drips by robots that were connected to the internet in such small hospitals. In the future, such medical robot hospitals would be promoted to every community and street. They would even enter many families like homeschooling robots. Flying motorcycles weren't available due to air traffic control. However, he had already seen scenes of flying motorcycles flying everywhere in some oil-producing countries. Some countries had already begun to prepare for new air traffic regulations. For China, this was an unstoppable future. Everything was developing and changing at a rapid pace. Even Rinpoche didn't know what the future of Earth would be like. The times were changing too fast, and it was even faster for him. He always felt that he would be abandoned by the new era at any time. Every time he came back, he would seize the opportunity to understand the changes on Earth. When they arrived in Shicheng, it was snowing. This made Xiangbing and Su Wei a little excited. It was rare to see snow in Dayo. Even the Empress would stretch out her hand to touch the fluttering snowflakes in the air. When the surrounding people saw them, they knew that they were from the south. However, with Xiangbing and Su Wei, these two fierce-looking big guys around, no one dared to talk to them. They hailed 2 taxis and went straight to their hometown. On the way, Rinpoche received a call from Mama Run and returned home before the sky turned dark in the afternoon. When they returned, Rinpoche's father was still carrying things and smoking and bragging with his neighbor at the corridor entrance. When he saw them, he immediately beamed with joy. "You are back." Rinpoche's father put on a stern face and put on a dignified front in front of his neighbor. He then warmly said to the Empress, "Zixiao is here too. Why are you wearing so little? And these two?" The Empress was wearing a red dress and a black fur coat, which indeed looked a little thin. "Your eldest son is back." The neighbor was also a man in his 50s. He had long heard that this family had an eldest son who was very rich and lived in another place. This was the first time he saw him. After looking at them, he immediately felt apprehensive. The lady was extremely beautiful and didn't look like an ordinary person. As for the other 3, not only did they not look like ordinary people, but they also didn't look like good people. Especially those 2 with ferocious faces. It would make anyone's heart tremble at the sight of them. There was also a burly man who should be the eldest son of the Rin family, right? They were the same family, but why was there such a big difference? Rinpoche looked at the Rin family's elderly couple and the youngest son who occasionally came back, and they all looked kind and normal. But this one and the 2 behind were obviously not the same kind of people. Subconsciously, he felt that he should stay away from the Rin family. "Let's talk another day. We're going up first," Rinpoche's father said to his neighbor and warmly greeted them. "It's cold outside. Come in quickly." After entering the elevator, Rinpoche looked at the Empress and found that her body was a little stiff. Her gaze was also a little wandering as she kept staring at the ceiling. Rinpoche reached out to grab the Empress's hand and was ruthlessly squeezed. Rinpoche's face turned green as he took a deep breath. He felt that the bones in his hand were about to break. "What's wrong?" Rinpoche quickly looked over and then looked up at the ceiling, but he didn't see anything. "Nothing." Rinpoche took a deep breath and turned to look at the Empress with an aggrieved look. The Empress glared at him, which made him feel a little baffled. He didn't do anything to provoke her. After entering the house, Rinpochian called out to Mama Run, "Look who's here, brother." Rin Wanyin came out of the room and was pleasantly surprised when he saw his brother. "Sister-in-law, this is the first time I've seen you in person. You're even more beautiful than in photos. Prettier than a celebrity." The Empress nodded slightly as a form of greeting. As for Rin Wanyin's words, she calmly accepted them. She had always thought that people who weren't Rinpochian were speaking a very normal truth that didn't need to be doubted. Did she need to care about other people speaking the truth? No need. Therefore, she naturally didn't feel that there was anything wrong with such praise. However, the way she looked at Rin Wanyin became gentler and more pleasing to the eye. Chapter 600. For the rest of the night, Mama Run, Papa Run, and Rin Wanyin practically circled around the Empress. The three of them didn't talk much. After all, it took a lot of courage to talk to the Empress. The three of them didn't know the Empress's hobbies and didn't know what to say. The Empress's aura didn't allow them to casually talk about their daily lives. The three of them lingered around the Empress from time to time. Occasionally, Rinpochian could hear Mama Rin talking on the phone and saying things like, "My son's girlfriend is here, so I won't be going." Perhaps all parents in the world had the heart to show off. From showing off their obedience in the beginning, to showing off their studies, to showing off their work, to showing off their income, to showing off their daughter-in-law, and finally to showing off their grandchildren, there was nothing to flaunt about money. Papa Run and Mama Run had started to hide their wealth to avoid some troublesome matters. After all, he was a member of the older generation, so he was quite cautious in this aspect. Her son had been away for several years and rarely showed his face. Although he had always said that he had a girlfriend, he had never shown her face, which made many people mutter incessantly. "Look, this is my daughter-in-law." Mama Rin took a selfie that Rinpochian had taken when he was fleeing for his life abroad. Then, many surprised voices could be heard. This was also what Mama Rin liked to talk about recently. Now that her son and daughter-in-law were finally at home, she wanted the whole world to know whose daughter-in-law was so beautiful. Such temperament? He was a civil servant, and his position was not low at all. It could be said to be perfect. That night, the Empress was exhausted. Although she seemed to be sitting in the same position, there were always people hovering around her. It was very uncomfortable. At night, the Empress finally found an opportunity to ask Rinpochian softly, "When are we going to set off the fireworks?" Rinpochian asked, "What fireworks?" "What fireworks? It was banned a long time ago. How could there be fireworks?" The Empress's face immediately turned black. He was hoping to see the fireworks in the city, but he was told that there weren't any. "Do you want to be whipped?" When Rinpochian saw the Empress's expression, he immediately figured it out. Could it be that the Empress came over so happily just to watch the fireworks? Otherwise, why would he ask this question at this time? He immediately changed the topic and said, "But if you want to set off fireworks, who would refuse? Even if it's forbidden, it's not impossible. However, the others are within the forbidden range. When the time comes, I can only release them myself." The Empress thought about it. She wanted to see the whole city filled with fireworks. If he couldn't see it, then releasing it himself was also an option. However, the root of his teeth was still itching. He felt that he had been cheated this time. He had worked hard for a whole night, and it was very likely that he would have to work hard for another night. But in the end, he didn't see anything. Although the whole city full of fireworks was something she had imagined after watching the TV series, she had selectively forgotten about it. There were 4 rooms in this house, and there was a guest room for the Empress to stay in. As for the 2 winged cavalry warriors, they squeezed into the same room as Rinpochian and were chased out asleep in the living room. The 2 of them didn't mind. What kind of environment had they not experienced in the winged cavalry? Too many times in the wilderness, it was already good enough to have a roof to cover one's body. It was just that when Rinpochian went to the toilet in the middle of the night, he almost got a fright. With the help of the light from the room, he saw 2 people sitting on the sofa. Their eyes were bright, like light bulbs in the dark night. In the middle of the night, These two silhouettes were really scary. Why aren't the two of you asleep yet? Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief and asked. In the end, the two of them didn't respond at all. Rinpoche frowned, and his heart immediately skipped a beat. The two of them weren't replying. What had happened? What happened? Xiangbing, Suwei, Rinpoche called out softly, but the two of them still didn't respond. Rinpoche's heart immediately tightened. Had something happened? However, after thinking about it carefully, there shouldn't be anything on earth that could affect the two of them. Even if there was something, it couldn't be hidden from the Empress, who was sleeping next door. After standing still for 2 minutes, Rinpoche reached out to turn on the light with his heart in his mouth. He then saw the two of them sitting upright on the sofa with their eyes wide open, looking ahead as if they were staring at something. Rinpoche looked in the direction that the two of them were looking at. Other than the television hanging on the wall, there was nothing else. What exactly is going on? Rinpoche stood there and carefully sized them up for a long time, but he couldn't see anything. He went forward to take a closer look at the two of them, only to find that their eyes were slack and completely unfocused. He stretched out his hand and waved it in front of their eyes, but they didn't react at all. Their chests were moving up and down, but they were still alive. Rinpoche's heart was in his mouth again. Could something have happened to the two of them? They were both winged cavalry warriors, so what could have happened to them? Could it be that they had been restrained by someone? Who could restrain the two of them without alerting the Empress? It was impossible for such a person to appear on Earth, right? Even if it was that mysterious monk. Could it really be that mysterious monk? It shouldn't be. That monk didn't have any conflicts with him, and he even received the second batch of peaches from him 2 months ago. Could it be that there was someone like that monk on Earth? At the thought of this, Rinpoche's eyes suddenly sharpened, and he shouted in a low voice, "Who is it?" There was silence. Rinpoche looked around the room and saw that there was nothing wrong with the surroundings. There wasn't a single person, and the windows and doors were all tightly shut. Don't blame me if you don't come out now. There was still silence. Was there really no one? What exactly happened? Could it be that there was something supernatural that he didn't understand? Rinpoche raised his vigilance. After confirming that there was no danger, he gently shook their shoulders. Their slack eyes immediately focused, and they looked at Rinpoche as if they had just woken up from a dream. "Lady Boss, what's wrong? What's wrong with the two of you?" Rinpoche looked around vigilantly and asked. "Resting. That's right, resting." Rinpoche's face immediately darkened. He had been pondering for half a day, but the two of them had been sleeping peacefully. Were the two of them sleeping with their eyes open, and both of them together? And their eyes were opened wide, like copper bells? And they were sleeping so soundly? Huh. Rinpoche didn't know what to say. He ignored the two of them with a gloomy face and strolled to the bathroom to relieve himself. He then came out with 2 towels and placed them on their heads, covering their faces. "Sir Rin, cover your faces so that you don't scare people." Rinpoche turned off the lights with a gloomy face. He looked back with the light in the room and inexplicably felt like the zombies in Lin Zhengying's zombie movies. After returning to his room to sleep for a short while, he heard the sound of another door opening, followed by Ren Wanyin's frightened scream. Then, Rinpoche's parents went out to check. After a period of noise, the room finally quieted down again. The next day, Ren Wanyin woke up with dark circles under his eyes. He looked at Rinpoche bitterly and said, "Brother, I was scared to death last night." Rinpoche snorted and naturally wouldn't tell him that he was also scared to death last night and even had a battle of wits with the air for half a day. Not long after, Papa Run and Mama Run came out, followed by the Empress. Among them, only the Empress wasn't affected much. In fact, the Empress also couldn't sleep last night. Living in such an unfamiliar environment and surrounded by a few unfamiliar but important people, the Empress actually suffered from insomnia, which was rare. Naturally, he could hear everything that was happening outside clearly. Even Rinpoche, who was having a battle of wits with the air, could hear it clearly. Although she didn't see many things, she could completely imagine them. However, she had no intention of reminding Rinpoche and listened to him entertain himself for a long time. Chapter 601. Since morning, Rinpoche had been instructing the two-winged cavalry warriors to paste couplets and the word "fu" on the door. The Empress was also watching excitedly from behind. A little more to the left. It's to the left. Do you know where the left is? Zixia, what do you think? Rinpoche turned to look at the Empress. Heaven lengthens the years, man lengthens the lifespan, and spring fills the universe with fortune. What good poem! Were the next two lines. The Empress praised softly as she recited the couplets on both sides of the door. There's nothing below. Oh, it's a eunuch, the Empress said with slight regret. Rinpoche's expression suddenly became interesting. He wanted to laugh, but he thought that he would most likely be beaten up, so he held it in. The words look good, but there's no essence, chi, and spirit in it. It's low quality. It's not even as good as your words that crawled out of nowhere. The Empress commented again. Thank you for your praise, Your Majesty. Rinpoche looked up at them and said, Put your hands down. Why are you still pressing them? Oh, they put their hands down and saw two clear palm prints on the couplets. They were completely imprinted on the inside of the door, and they were at least 1 centimeter deep. Rinpoche's mouth twitched as he chased them into the house. After entering the house, Papa Run went out to check if the couplets were crooked. After a while, he came back with a complicated look on his face. He looked at the two-winged cavalry warriors as if they were livestock. Every month, Rinpoche's parents and Ren Wanyin would receive the meat that Rinpoche brought back from the other world. Compared to their hard work, the speed of their cultivation was considered very fast. Even compared to those who practiced martial arts in the military, their speed wasn't slow. After a year, their strength had increased a lot. Mama Ren didn't even pant when she carried 50 kilograms of rice upstairs. However, looking at the deep palm prints on the door, he still felt that they were livestock. In particular, they weren't made with a single slap. There wasn't any sound previously, and they were obviously directly pressed down, which was even more terrifying. Even Papa Ren felt that if humans could become so terrifying, the world might really undergo great changes in the future. Papa Ren took the time to chat with Rinpoche during the day, but both of them felt the same. With the rapid advancement of technology and martial arts, no one knew what the world would become in the future. Papa Ren wasn't too worried about himself. After all, these changes wouldn't happen overnight, and he was already old. He was just a little worried about Rinpoche and Ren Wanyin's future. Don't worry about me. I have money and power. No matter what happens, I won't lose out. Rinpoche saw through his father's thoughts, waved his hand, and smiled. Rich and powerful? Papa Ren scoffed. How can you be considered rich and powerful with that little bit of money? In the eyes of the common people, it was fine, but in the eyes of the truly rich and powerful, it was nothing. In the past, it would at most be considered a humble family. Father, do you have some kind of misunderstanding about the poor? Do you have some kind of misunderstanding about the poor? Do you think ordinary people are poor? Ordinary people couldn't even be considered poor. The commoners were also called the commoners, which corresponded to the landowning families. Only those who had the prestige of a county could be called a soldier, and those who had the prestige of a county could only be called a squire or a commoner. In the past, a prefecture was about the size of a province. A county was now an ordinary prefecture-level city. To have enough prestige in an ordinary prefecture-level city and have a considerable say in a city, even if one wasn't the richest person in the city, wasn't far off. How much was the richest man in a city worth? Let's not talk about anything else. Do you know about the Xiao clan? It's at least 10 billion yuan. What's that little bit of money? Furthermore, you haven't even passed the third generation. Saying that you are from a humble family is already flattering you. Papa Ren's rebuke made Rinpoche's face turn black, following which he looked puzzled and asked, Is this what a humble family means? Ignorant and incompetent thing. Do you think you are from a humble family just because you don't wear warm clothes in winter? Papa Run rebuked Rinpochian and was immediately in a good mood. It had been a long time since he established his prestige like this. Stop showing off what you have. Your father has been learning from you ever since and is now fascinated by classical culture. He studies it all day long. Mama Rin stuck her head out from the kitchen and exposed Papa Run. One is never too old to learn. Papa Run didn't mind at all. At least he could still teach his son a lesson. Lady Boss will be a member of the imperial family in the future. How can she be from a humble family? The two winged cavalry warriors grinned. Lady Boss, imperial family? Papa Run opened his mouth and subconsciously looked at the Empress. Seeing that she was calm and had no intention of refuting, he didn't know whether she heard it or not. However, imperial family. Could this daughter-in-law be a relative of one of the higher-ups? Papa Ren's mind spun and was immediately shocked. He glanced at the Empress again and felt that it was more likely. Based on the aura of this daughter-in-law, how could she be raised by an ordinary family? Furthermore, Rinpochian's two subordinates were obviously not ordinary people. How could they be ordinary people who could directly leave for fingerprints on the security door? Where did Rinpochian get such subordinates from? Could he hire such subordinates with that little bit of money? Who was he trying to fool? Where did these subordinates come from? It was terrifying to think about it. Papa Ren's face first turned pale, then green, and finally black. He jumped up and walked into the house. What's wrong? Rinpochian was shocked when he saw his father's facial expression changing rapidly. Rinpochian didn't know what was going through his father's mind. I'm going to eat a bottle of 6 flavor Remania pills to calm myself down, Papa Rin said without looking back. Rinpochian immediately spurted out his drink. When Papa Rin came back, he didn't mention anything about the poor family anymore and acted as if nothing had happened. The moment he opened his mouth, he would talk about how wise the current leader was. When he closed his mouth, he would talk about how good the current development situation was and how it was all thanks to the leadership of the party. It was only then that he realized what his father had imagined. However, those 2 winged cavalry warriors weren't wrong. They were indeed from the imperial family, but it was different from what his father thought. After thinking about it, Rinpochian pulled his father aside and said, Zhixiao's identity is special. It's not what you think. Special? I understand. I can't tell you about this. Don't worry, I've eaten more salt than you've eaten rice. How can I not understand? Papa Rin had a look of understanding on his face. Then he pondered deeply. If Zhixiao was only outstanding and had an outstanding family background, it would be fine. However, since she had connections with the higher-ups, it would be troublesome. Could he still see her as his daughter-in-law? Was it really okay for her to be with his son? Rinpochian looked at his expression and was speechless. You really don't understand. She has nothing to do with the higher-ups. Papa Rin immediately understood. So it wasn't the higher-ups, but the next Empress? Had the next Empress already been decided? All right, I know what you're up to. It's just that I can't interfere in your matters. Pay more attention. Papa Rin shook his head. Rinpochian realized that if he didn't explain clearly, his father wouldn't understand. However, could he explain the Empress's identity? How? The Empress of another world? Forget it. Rinpochian thought about it and decided not to explain. The more he explained, the worse it would be. For the rest of the afternoon, his father didn't show any signs of abnormality. In fact, he didn't even mention anything about Mama Run. He was the only one who was worried from time to time. At around 7 o'clock in the evening, Rinpochian dragged the Empress and the 2 winged cavalry warriors downstairs. Renwanyan followed them. When they arrived downstairs, there were already 2 SUVs and a half-built truck waiting there. The truck was wrapped tightly with canvas. Brother, why are you being so secretive? Renwanyan looked at his brother, then at the 2 bears, and then at his sister-in-law. They were all wearing thin clothing and didn't feel cold at all in this minus 20 degrees Celsius weather. He was the only one who was wrapped up tightly. When he pulled down the zipper of the truck, he felt a gust of cold wind blowing in. He shivered and quickly pulled the zipper back. "Let's set off the fireworks." Rinpoche called out and got into the truck. The group drove for 20 minutes to the suburbs, found an empty space, and untied the canvas. Sure enough, the truck was loaded with all kinds of fireworks. Not long after, the first firework bloomed in the sky. Then, more fireworks rose into the sky. The Empress looked up at the fireworks. The flickering light reflected on her face, and her face was full of serenity and gentleness. Rinpoche reached out and held the Empress's hand tightly. The two of them stood shoulder to shoulder. "Are you cold?" Rinpoche asked softly as he looked at Ran Wanyin and the two winged cavalry warriors who were happily setting off fireworks in the distance. As long as the Empress said that she was cold, he would be able to hug her justifiably. "I'm not cold. Oh, but I'm so cold. Your Majesty, please hug me," Rinpoche said with a smile and waited for the incoming kick. He was already mentally prepared for a close encounter with the snow. However, the Empress hugged him from behind, placed her chin on his shoulder, and asked softly, "Are you warm?" "Very warm." Rinpoche smiled and held the Empress's hands that were wrapped in front of him. In the distance, two winged cavalry warriors inadvertently raised their heads and saw the Empress and Rinpoche. They then turned their heads away with a peaceful smile on their faces and happily set off fireworks. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.